even at this point, you have them deeply penetrated and vastly into thousands of infrastructure, points of critical infrastructure. So they're not doing that, we just figured we'd take a look and see what it looks like. No, they're doing that in the case of conflict to shut down the U.S. To shut down, food, to shut down electricity, to shut down water, etc. That's the only reason to do that sort of thing. If they're relentless in keeping pushing forward, then they'll be a dominating force on the planet by 2035.
Welcome on the show. I really appreciate making the trip out. Providing some context, I guess, can you lay out your background and, the area of kind of study that you've been deep diving?
I did part of my undergraduate and graduate work in Taiwan and mainland China. Got my degrees in East Asian studies. When I got out of Asia, came back, I went into the CIA, spent about 4.5 years in the CIA, what we called at that time a technical operations officer. Went from there to Diplomatic Security Service in the U.S. Department of State. I was a special agent there. Did a lot of counterintelligence work on Asia. And then from there, went to Defense Intelligence Agency, where I spent the remainder of a 34-year career. A lot of that time dealing directly with China, a lot of that time dealing with advanced technology and space systems because of China. So China's pretty much been my background for my entire adult life. I retired in 2017 and became a professor of Homeland Security at Penn State University. I published my first work on Chinese intelligence in 1994, and actually resulted in over 100 Chinese intelligence officers being withdrawn globally and being brought back to China. And because, publishing in the intel community isn't normally done externally. So, but that was a big issue with Congress and stuff. There were testified multiple times before Congress in that on economic espionage and espionage by China. But then when I got out, in 2017, retired, I've maintained data, research, and so I have begun now again publishing on Chinese intelligence.
Yeah, like I said on the phone, it's one of the most comprehensive overviews of, what Chinese intelligence, just from, buth domestic and foreign, and the way that they kind of operate and what their operation parameters are. And it's kind of a sneak peek into, a society we really haven't seen like before.
Right. Well, the difference is actually data. There's a handful of us that have published on Chinese espionage. But the database that I developed over a decade has we're looking at about 870 cases now. 870 cases of espionage, economic espionage, theft of technology, theft of academic research, illegal exports, right? So, and each one is extraordinary detail. And when you take all that data and then you're able to analyze and crunch it, you come out with extraordinary results. This is the type of tradecraft applied for economic espionage. These were the motivations used to recruit people for illegal technology exports, which differ from the motivations used for espionage. So you're really able to dive into Chinese espionage operations across a broad band of what we call espionage and really understand the operational parameters and how on their tradecraft and how they work. And that's sort of the real difference. That's a specialty area of publishing for me.
Could you move on the chair just a little bit, just so it's perfect? I guess getting to one of the main theories or ideologies that kind of underscores the CCP is the whole of society approach.
Right.
Could you break that down in terms of what that looks like, both in mainland China and operations abroad?
Sure. When you look at espionage in the West, in the United States, we have CIA, we have FBI, we have agencies that do clandestine activity, we have agencies that do enforcement activity and collect information and put that back. But it's all within the rubric of the federal government. Right? China's a lot different. They don't do it that way because what they literally go to steal, their espionage is so broad-based, they use their industry. They use their state-owned enterprises. They use their academic centers. They use their commercial industries. And of course, they use their government and party organizations. So the number of collectors you have out there is vast compared to any other country on the planet. They literally employ a whole of society to collect information, which is different from pretty well every law enforcement service, in the Western world.
Mm-hmm. And I guess in comparison, if we're looking at, from a U.S. perspective, and we were talking about this before getting recording started, kind of the variation of approach of a Soviet Union versus China. Can you kind of identify, why this whole of society approach is very different from what we might have saw with the Soviet Union?
Well, the Soviet Union had, again, it was a centralized structure. And other than probably in the early 80s, they had very, very aggressive economic espionage, theft of technology, 70s and 80s, to try and catch up with the West. But outside of that, they did not have the expansive interest in commercial activity. So China has a very close relationship between its commercial sectors and its government and the party. So it's in their interest to steal commercial technologies, and then the government often funds those. So, for example, you had the PLA stealing technology, through a cyber attack, stealing technology for solar panels, which then was given to a commercial company, and the Chinese government turned around and funded that commercial company to produce solar panels. Okay, that actually resulted in the in an not economic espionage, but Defend Trade Secrets Act of 2016, because they were doing that. They were stealing, giving it to their own internal commercial companies, and then turning around and funding those, to be competitive against the West. Same thing we have in the steel industry. Manufacturing techniques were stolen, and all these cases were prosecuted out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Again, stolen by Unit 61398 of the People's Liberation Army, put into Chinese industry, and then used against, and then funded by the government to dominate that industry. And we see this now, them attempting to do this with biotechnologies. There was such an aggressive theft campaign against vaccines when COVID broke out by the Chinese government, and criminal groups the Chinese government hired. So for the same reason that they want domination of the biotech market. Even things like this, the theft of U.S. Personally identifiable information, blood results, hospitals that are just stolen by the millions. Why they steal is really all for the development of China's research in the biotech field. So you don't see. The U.S. government has no relationship with industry in this regard, right? U.S. government steals something, it's defense related, it's military, it's foreign policy related, and nothing gets past. There are laws against that, right? Nothing gets past to private industry. Russia doesn't have a developed private industry enough that it really works, that closely with the government. But China, you can't separate it. Mm-hmm. And then there's a whole dynamic of corruption. Oh yeah, I'll give you this if we'll fund you for this, but the people in the government are taking a chunk of that for themselves. Mm-hmm. So this incredible corruption is pervasive and woven into all this process.
You kind of highlighted it there, and I'd be interested in diving deeper into it, is China's legal framework for espionage. Oftentimes has been, and I'm sure we'll deep dive this, further later in the conversation, but it's been, people are starting to recognize more that we're fighting against somebody that doesn't necessarily play by the same rules. And in a lot of ways, it makes the way that we operate vastly more challenging than what China, currently is going through, both in mainland and abroad.
Right.
What does that legal framework look like?
Okay. Fine. I actually want to get back to the question of we're starting to realize in a moment, because that's a real interesting one for the U.S. But that legal framework, it looks like a series of laws passed in China starting in 2014 with their counterintelligence law. That was just revamped in 2023 to be more expansive as to what could potentially be considered a threat. The National Intelligence Law in 2017, And then another implementation of the National Intelligence Law, again in 2017, and the National Security Law in Hong Kong 2020. And they got a whole bunch of other cybersecurity laws, etc. And what all these laws bring together is a couple of just top-of-the-line facts. Anything the Chinese government considers a potential threat or potentially sensitive is illegal and could be espionage. Anything. So that means taking pictures on a street corner. That means anything that they determine, and they're vague about this, intentionally vague about it, so they could make anything be considered espionage, to use that statute against anyone. This is, in addition to that, any company any Chinese citizen, any company, any foreign company doing business in China is obligated to give the Chinese government, Chinese intelligence services and law enforcement information when they want it, right? You have no options. They get the information. This is the whole argument behind TikTok and Chinese companies, because as they collect vast amounts of data on Americans, and it's the distinction you should make between Google and Facebook and everyone else. I mean, the difference is, people ask, what's the difference? The Chinese are, taking it to Facebook. Well, the difference is Facebook doesn't have nukes pointed at you. Mm-hmm. Okay? I mean, bottom line, that's the difference. And those companies, like it or not, they can say whatever they want, but they're obligated. They have to do it. And we've seen Jack Ma was held for 3 months in China incognito because he was slow and refusing to provide data that the Chinese government wanted. China shut down Zoom because they were slow in responding to the Ministry of Public Security. And you can see this in an FBI criminal complaint. They actually shut down Zoom in China not because they refused to, because they were slow in responding to the Chinese government's demand for information.
Really?
Yeah. As 2019, as China sees it, look, if you have dissidents on Zoom, they're in the US, got it, they're violating Chinese law. Okay, they're violating Chinese law. You're giving the information to us. And Zoom actually agreed at the time to provide that information within 1 minute of the law of the infraction occurring, right? That they would develop software to do it within 1 minute out of the US and Hong Kong on over 1 million people, including the data on over 1 million people. So with this as a background, which most Americans don't know, mm-hmm. right? The question is, okay, how much do you want your personal information? And that includes all your contact lists, many times your location, all the details of your communications, how long you've looked at things you've liked, things you don't like, all those things. How much do you want in the hands of what's become a hostile government? If you're a company in China, as I see company and embassies in China, the employees are scared to death now. And it's demanded that they report to the Ministry of State Security. So whole of society approach, whether it's apps, whether it's using people employed in foreign companies, to draw in information into China.
Backtracking there, I guess an argument you always hear from people is that, I don't care, China's taking my information because who am I? What do I have anything to do with that? I mean, do you see any negatives with that just because, whether it's creating external links or whether it's allowing, we'll get to this in a little bit, but recruitment process and motivations being able to be targeted, like right. All those?
Well, China has what they call cognitive warfare, right? Where they research and they work aggressively towards how do we mold and manipulate people to win the war without firing a shot. This goes back to Sun Tzu, The Art of War, mm-hmm. right? It says, the acme of skill is to, win without fighting a battle. And their focus is on that, and it's long term. So the question is, how do we manipulate people so that they're not aggressive towards China, so that they support China, so that they feel like, what do I care if the Chinese government has my data? Well, the way we do that is we see what they watch. We put artificial intelligence into that. We see how long they watch. They see what type of people they watch. They see what what the subject matters are, and then we slowly manipulate that, and we shape that until it supports the positions of the CCP. So, in addition to just identifying people and locating people, and I mean that goes everywhere from the Secret Service detail down to a school kid. Okay. In addition to that type of, collection, it's really a frightening part of it is the ability to manipulate over society over a period. And because this is so alien to the U.S., I mean, we do that, but we do it through McDonald's, right? We do it through rock and roll, we do it through people. I want to be like that, I want that freedom and stuff. It's in the United States, it's soft power that we have globally, right? Well, look, this is how we live. And most of the time, we've had lots of bumps in past years, in recent years. But most of the time, for the history, the post-World War II history, everyone has wanted to enjoy the freedoms and be like the U.S. It's why we have millions coming into our country, right? No other country in the world has that. And the reason is because they want to be part of America. So that, China doesn't have that. Nobody's trying to get into China. So it is forced to take a more coercive and manipulative approach to try and alter governments at state levels, at federal levels, and to alter the general population and their perceptions on China.
So it's kind of that idea of like the Yuri Bezmenov of the ideological subversion of just really kind of, if you break down the foundation, you can kind of break down the whole house.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. And, there were times in the United States when our bureaucratic apparatus sort of understood that because they dealt with it with the then Soviet Union, right? There were excesses, the McCarthy era and such, but they basically understood that at its foundation it was an ideological war. And they could point to specific things the Soviets, that bloc, was doing during that time frame. We had mechanisms built in government at the National Security Council level and such to be able to respond to that. We don't. America's become so fractured, and who even knows what American ideology is at this point? So it's been manipulated, destroyed, sort of rebuilt, but that's where we are. So it's difficult to operate in that environment.
Have you had the opportunity to explore what data TikTok is targeting for an average American?
Yeah, I actually posted all TikTok's data that they collect. And so the things I said before were what they collect. They collect everything from geographic location. If you become, literally, as you're working geographic location, what you look, how long you look. They collect your contact list. They collect. They don't collect the content of emails, but they collect who you connect with. So yeah, it's actually all pretty simple. It's in their terms of reference, not email, but who you connect with on TikTok, right? So you can, and LinkedIn does the same thing. If you were to run, just use marketing software on Nick Eftimiades on LinkedIn, and as people have sent me, and you get me in the center with all my close contacts around, my further contacts around further, and TikTok does the same thing. And then we combine that with what they do. And, well, what's Nick looking at? What are his friends looking at? What are their interest areas? And so as the targeting thing goes, they know me. They know how to get to me because they know how to get to me through others that I'm closely associated with. And they also know my areas of interest and can put things in front of me to sort of manipulate that.
Do you think that they're pushing the algorithm, for YouTube, for example, when this video gets uploaded, people that are watching it, it's a viewer profile, somebody that is aligned with, this type of topic, this type of content. And so that's what that algorithm is pushing, to kind of match a viewer or something they enjoy. If you go on TikTok and, you're on there for a little while and it starts getting this read on you, is it purposely pushing you into, something more of like an echo chamber? Right.
Well, that's the fear. The fear is that it's not that it's pushing you into an echo chamber because that's sort of expected. The fear is that they're interjecting or can interject information to you, with a certain political bent, right? They want to manipulate the elections. Look, we're showing 20 times more, for example, Biden, ads than we are showing Trump ads. I don't even know how, the problem is that stuff is really not quantifiable. Does it actually throw an election? We have no idea, right? No one's ever gone out and surveyed, well, you saw 22 ads on Biden. Did that influence you? Which you'd have to do if you really, really wanted data. But the fear is that they have that ability to do it, that their algorithms are targeting for that sort of thing. And there's some evidence that, we combine that with the fact that they have to provide this to the Chinese government. We know the Chinese government is working aggressively on cognitive warfare. And there have been incidents, not the least of which, where TikTok has passed off journalists that were critical of the Chinese government and passed off information on them and their networks and contacts to the Chinese government. So those things, provide a concern, not even just today, but long term, for the U.S.
Further in this discussion, and we'll get to recruitment in a sec, but in a way I would imagine this is kind of recruitment adjacent, is the idea of, troll farms or utilizing, comment sections to rile up people or even create conversation. Have you seen any evidence or even, an inkling that is currently being utilized? Because you'll go on some of these social media sites and it's like, a profile that was made 4 days ago saying just the most outrageous stuff.
I have trolls on me all the time. I mean, and it's funny because you can blatantly tell, like Discus, right? Mm-hmm. You can blatantly tell the ones from China because you click on them and you see, well, this person was signed up 4 years ago and they have 48,000 comments. One guy I figured out, wait. That means you have to have something like 120 comments a day, in order to be coming out this. Yeah. And truth be told, everyone knows they're trolls on it. Everyone, many people call them out for being that. Mm-hmm. So it is a very, very aggressive. They call the 50 Cent Army, the Wuma, the 50 Cent Army.
Yeah, because it's my worry is that, when you think about younger generation, especially teenagers, early 20s, we see the political, turmoil that's currently facing the U.S. I mean, the Israel-Palestine conflict was its own, kind of domain. Trump-Biden rolls around, there's consistently things that it seems like from all directions, people are getting, pushed further and further into those echo chambers, or comments are getting, more and more aggressive. And so it kind of all builds on each other. Like that, the ideological subversion is, if you push the algorithm in one direction and then you have comments that are supporting that, you kind of create that somewhat of a mind virus, and it goes both ways.
Well, but you think about it, though, that's our assumption. Mm-hmm. Like I said, that at least in the academic literature, the stuff I looked at, no one's ever turned around. As I said, you're creating an echo chamber, and I said, okay, well, how many votes does that affect? Exactly what effect does that have? Mm-hmm. And well, you're not listening to that. I know what I'm listening to and not. What effect does that have? So, and no one's ever quantified the effect. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're just assuming that it's this big effect on everybody. And for me, I mean, maybe in the younger generations, I can see that forming. But for a person in their 60s who has lived their entire life, you're probably not going to be changing, that older generation, their perspectives, because it was built on decades and decades of experience. Mm-hmm. So it would take a lot to really shift a mindset. I mean, new data is always, something that does that. No, that wasn't actually the case. It was really 1, 2, 3. Of course, that will. But we don't have any good answers. People are just making big assumptions.
So I guess the other question, since we're just diving into TikTok, is there an understanding, like, what is the change in, I guess, legal framework around the world as well? Like, obviously in China, I'm sure it's vastly more in favor of the CCP in terms of data collection, in terms of, what people are actually seeing, et cetera. But, for close allies, let's say, the UK or somewhere in Europe, like, are they able to kind of use that as a pipeline as well to further get American information or anything similar?
That's a good question. And the answer is that the short answer is yes. The somewhat longer answer is we haven't seen a lot of it. Mm-hmm. I mean, are they able to? Yeah. Do we know that they're actually getting American technology through the UK or Germany? I don't think so. We know they're getting German technology or UK technology because a lot of the laws in Europe are much more lax on guarding and shipping of technology than they are in the US. So that's number one. But we have seen cases there. Number one. Number two, we know that they're getting military information about the United States through Germany, through the UK, and let's see. I'm not coming off on anything else offhand, but we've actually seen cases of recruiting people at the U.S. bases and things like that in Germany and the UK. So we know that. We know that they collect against the EU and their political process. We know that they specifically have an intent to drive a wedge between the United States and the EU. They have been, their MSS assets have recruited people. That's come out in Belgium with exactly that direction and taken covert action, in recruiting other people to put forth policy positions to try and push the two entities apart. So a lot of things we know. I'm not going to say I don't see a lot of the technology. It could be, and I just haven't detected it yet.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of evidence that's saying U.S. technology is being stolen from Europe.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess going back to the whole society approach, diving deeper, because I think this is pretty critical to understand. So what is the relationship between the CCP and private business as well? I mean, they're pretty ingrained. I don't know the exact percentage, but I know a certain percentage is just directly state-owned, but even ones that aren't state-owned are essentially state-owned. So can you maybe break that down a little bit further?
So in China, there are state-owned enterprises and then what they call commercial private enterprises. Nothing is real as a private enterprise as we would know it. For example, Huawei says that it's a company-owned enterprise, and that it has a union. It was a company-owned thing which has a union, but that union is under the CCP. So it's controlled by the CCP. So, it depends on Americans immediately think, oh, well, they have a union. No, it's a union control, which is under a specific department in the Chinese Communist Party. So the definitions are a little different. State-owned enterprises, China actually has cut down, used to have 300,000 of them, now has about 150,000 of them. 50,000 of them, and these are separate state-owned enterprises at the central government level. The rest are at provincial levels. And in those 50,000, we could probably say 112 or so they call their national champions, right? And a state-owned enterprise, 51% or more owned by either the Chinese government or the provincial government, okay? So, and some of those is, China Aerospace Corporation, Aerospace Technology Corporation, hundreds of thousands of people in each one. So, China National Petroleum Corporation, big companies, if you will. Whether it's that or private companies, which are allegedly private unto themselves, in the case of state-owned enterprises, they absolutely have to have a Chinese Communist Party committee in the place, and that is to ensure. Xi Jinping said this in 2018, 2017. The head of the State Council said this. That is to ensure that company is supporting the CCP, doing what the CCP directs. Okay, and they said, you're not in here to make a profit. Your first obligation is to support the CCP. Again, not the state, but the Chinese Communist Party. So, and in every one of those companies, they're required to have a high-level Chinese, CCP committee to ensure that the company is working towards the advancement of the party. Okay? That happens at state-owned enterprises. We have seen state-owned enterprises and even private companies now starting militias, like uniformed military-type militias.
Right.
We haven't seen that since the 50s. But we are seeing that they're starting militias to support the CCP, as they call it. The same roles are more suggested in private companies. And, every private company above 50 people should have a CCP committee. Mm-hmm. And all the CCP committees with their players are party members. They go through a separate background check, and they're responsible to the party. So, it's an extraordinary lesson in management. It's unbelievable. Hundreds of millions, and 90 million people, 94 million in the CCP, controlled by the government, all with moving forward in the same fashion. It's just unbelievable. Mm. We see it in the security side. We see it in the intelligence side. We see it in the commercial side. It's really, really an amazing lesson in global management.
Diving further on that, how do the people feel about this whole society approach? Essentially any business you're working for, you start in one way or another is always doing in the interest of the CCP. That's something I don't think Americans can.
No, see, Americans would flip on that. China is sort of different. And this is one of these arguments that we used to have over the decades. on policy towards China. Because, and surveys have shown, they've done internal surveys in China. People have flipped out when Chinese companies are collecting their data, but they were fine with the government collecting their data. Quite literally the exact opposite, from what you have in the United States. One of the reasons Jack Ma, one of the richest people in China, was detained for 3 months for, collecting data and not willing to give it over to the government. So the approach has been different. China has always been considered living in a glass bowl, living in a fish bowl, I guess they call it. Harvard did studies on this years ago, and the stress level in people's lives living in such a glass bowl environment. So, and the example now, you have to go through the incredible domestic surveillance apparatus that's in place, monitoring over 1 billion cell phones at the same time, monitoring locations, monitoring your credit card, real time, using your credit card, going with your cell phone, facial recognition all over the place, constant surveillance. If you cross a street and jaywalk, this isn't implemented nationwide, but in major cities at this point. If you cross the street and jaywalk, your face appears on a wall across the street, and it says, Nick Eftimiades, you have jaywalked, $25 fine is deducted from your account. And it's done. I mean, if you can imagine the type of pervasive surveillance you have to have in a society to be able to do that. The agreement, unspoken agreement between the Chinese Communist Party and the citizenry was, look, you don't oppose the party, you let us do this, and we'll make you wealthy. We'll make you rich. Something China has not known for 70 years, right? Mass starvations and people still living in dirt floors, the majority of China, right? That's not a bad deal. So people say, fine, I want to be rich, I want to do. Well, the problem with that is that as the economy has slowed, the government is less able to meet its obligation in that. And that's creating dissent. Mm-hmm. And in the case of China, dissent doesn't mean protesting on the streets normally, because they really don't have the opportunity to. Everything is shut down at the lowest levels because of that pervasive surveillance apparatus. So we get a lot of people fleeing to the U.S. and fleeing elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's, kind of where I wanted to go as well. As you highlighted, they went from 300 state-owned business, or 300,000 state-owned businesses, right, breaking down to 100,000. And then, I think people over the past couple of years, it's been consistent videos of China's collapsing because, the bank is failing, and, it's a known thing that they're kind of artificially propping up their dollar or the yen or what. There's just a lot of background noise happening there, for lack of a better word. Again, is that China trying to pivot? Like, giving the idea of, hey, look, we're giving you guys more freedom now because we're getting richer, when in reality, the freedom's never there.
They're not giving them that type of freedom. That's the deal. Anyone who says China, and I see this like on YouTube and places like that, China's ready to collapse and stuff, those people don't know what they're talking about. And the reason they don't is because nobody knows. China doesn't know. In the days that I was working, China came to us asking for data on its industrial production. It came to me. I'm like, what? Yeah, they want data. Why? Because they don't have accurate data inside. Okay, that I get. That's true. Because you know what? Within those state-owned enterprises and such, everybody lies. It's an issue of face, right? So no one wants to turn to their management and saying, I blew this completely. We're off in production. We're not making production. We're doing this. We're doing that. We're failing here. We're failing there. It's a big loss of face, not only for you, but for your boss, in a Confucian-based humanistic system like China. Well, they don't. They all say, oh, it's going great, boss. It's going good. We could use other people to do this and that, but everything's going great. And the result, when you look through the massive bureaucracy like that, whether it's discussions of the military or whether it's discussions of their economic output, so they got no idea. And we, distant across the world, we have no idea. what the real structure is under their economic base. Yeah, you see indicators and stuff, but no one can really give you that accurately just because, the figures that are put out are so untrustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one issue. I mean, you have tons of other issues in behavior, things like marriage. I mean, marriage in China is down something like 22% from 2023, but that's it's a 2023 had a COVID bounce, right? So they call it. But it's been down dramatically, and it's something like 20% since 2012. Marriages are down, which means the birth rates are collapsing. Now that's real statistics, right? So the birth rates are collapsing. So you have a country that when we presumed it was going to keep rising until 2050 to 2070, now in 2022 was at its height of population and is going down. And that downward turn is accelerating. So whatever you thought you were going to sell in China, the next generation, you're going to have 20% less people to sell it to. And the one after that, you're going to have less people to sell it to. So there are a lot of stresses in their economy that are coming in. And the U.S., that's why the trade, the trade war is going to hurt them a whole lot more than us. Mm-hmm. I mean, U.S. industries, Japanese industries, Korean industries, are already hundreds of them. Companies have moved out of China and moved to what they call the four tigers, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand, right? And those economies are building because of the geopolitical threat and, to be frank, the corruption in China and the risk they were taking, the theft of IP, intellectual property. So that has been underway for a few years now. So China's lost that, a foreign influx of money, of knowledge, capital coming in. That's leaving at an increasingly rapid pace. Then Trump gets in and says, you know what? If you bring it all back to America, I'll cut your tax rate in less than half. The play is afoot.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of,
and your stuff's not getting stolen.
Right. And your intellectual property is not getting stolen. So there's a lot of challenges ahead for China, and particularly how it's going to deal with the U.S.
Do you think that's why they've been so keened in on economic espionage then as well?
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I mean, they've stolen trillions in economic espionage, trillions and trillions. And that, the estimates are, I kind of lowball the estimate, and I'll say less than $400 billion a year. But the U.S. trade rep will say that goes up to $600 billion. So, per year, and it's been happening for years. Mm-hmm. So, and you can see they've dominated in industries because they steal technology or they steal intellectual property. They pump it into their commercial companies or their state-owned enterprises, and the government funds the development of those. So it's solar panels being a prime one. So that they have basically affected the greatest transfer of wealth in history.
So it's probably a good time to break down the difference between economic espionage and military espionage, because I imagine, a lot of listeners or viewers will see, spy, espionage, CIA, MSS, whatever agency, and be like, oh, it's military espionage. It's some guy breaking in, stealing, the newest breakdown or nuclear secrets, whatever. But realistically, as you're just highlighting, a lot of the impact has come from economic espionage.
Sure.
So can you detail the difference between those two?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I highlight, my book centers on this, on slicing out, the different aspects of how much economic espionage are they doing and who's doing it. Mm-hmm. Not only who's doing it, but what type of tradecraft are they using? That between political, military espionage, theft of technologies, etc. So what you find is that a large number of state-owned enterprises, academic research institutes, commercial companies, all engage in economic espionage. Most of that in cooperation with either the Chinese government, could be the intelligence, or the PLA, or the Chinese Communist Party for investment funds, those type of things. We've seen both those. But the cutting edge of that type of theft is unquestionably commercial industry in China. So, I mean, it's amazing, but they'll typically go back to China and go around, have the party officials take them around to state-owned enterprises to collect funding and they literally show General Electric slides, or in the recent case in Google, showing Google's AI technology and having WeChat groups to showcase, admittedly, this is Google's AI technology. You can see it's here, we have it, we can apply this and we can apply, and then stand on the giant's shoulder was the term I heard applied. So it's all commercial. I mean, that type of economy, supported by the government and the party. The Ministry of State Security plays a very small role other than cyber. I think maybe like 13% of the economic espionage cases are attributed to the MSS, unless you include cyber, in which case it's, and I don't track the cyber component of it. The People's Liberation Army has a very strong focus on theft of technology, illegal exports. That's yet another slice of that, how we see economic espionage, and that's for military purposes. Now, when you come over to actual espionage, there are two primaries in that. China's Ministry of State Security and the People's Liberation Army, specifically the Joint Intelligence Bureau under the Central Military Commission. Those are two that focus on stealing secrets, political and military secrets globally.
Mm-hmm. Can we dive further into, I guess, some of those key players and some of the agencies? I mean, like what would be China's, I guess, best comparison to a CIA? So something that's focused on foreign intelligence.
So Ministry of State Security, China's premier civil intelligence agency, which formed in 1983. What they call the Communist Party Investigations Department and the Ministry of Public Security and the National Cops, which still have a huge role, but did counter espionage in those days. Constant fighting back and forth. So the party finally said, "Fine, you guys can't get along. We're taking this from the Ministry of Public Security and that from the Investigations Department and putting them together to form a new agency, the Ministry of State Security." So they have traditional case officers. A lot of their work is broken down by subject area, right? So the Shanghai Municipal Bureau, for example, Shanghai Municipal Office for the Ministry of State Security will have divisions within it or bureaus within it that would collect on dissidents, that would collect on technology, advanced technology, focus on stealing advanced technology and other specific areas. The control mechanism, they're actually controlled by the party apparatus at provincial levels, more so than their office in Beijing, right? Their daily activities and stuff are given to the local party office, and the party office maintains control of them, right? So all these provinces, 31 provinces, all these have a local party office which is controlling them, and that's because of this ingrained suspicion that any intelligence or law enforcement outfit could be used to turn against the party, right? Which is why first thing Xi Jinping did when he got in is started shooting people. Basically, oh, you're in the Ministry of Public Security, a senior person, you're gone. And if they were lucky, they got out without a prison sentence. But that's cleaning house for them. So it's politicized to the greatest degree, and it has been for decades. So that would be the Ministry of State Security. The military side of that, and both have case officers overseas. We could talk a little about the tradecraft employed by each, but both have case officers that function worldwide, and case officers meaning collectors, people, operations officers. I think you've had people like that on your show. So,
yeah, James Launder would be a great example.
So the same thing we see in the military. We see the Joint Intelligence Bureau under the Central Military Commission, and their focus, as you might imagine, is going to be military, right? So their focus is on foreign military, pretty aggressive against Taiwan military, but they focus on recruiting, spotting, assessing, and recruiting foreign military to provide military intelligence to China. They have different provincial bureaus. Actually, they have regional setups where they field case officers out of, but they have a strong overseas presence as well. They also do a lot of what any military does, like what you would call them line crossers, people who come across the line, so to speak, people who come in who may have access to military information, and they're set up in the provincial areas along borders and things like that to collect anything, what might that person know on a foreign military in their host country? Were they ever in the military of Vietnam? Things like that. So that's all taken and reported. I think they have 7 locations or so, that large scale ones, that report to a centralized structure, to collect military intelligence, as well as their overseas presence in all of China's embassies.
Mm-hmm. How would you compare them to the CIA, like more directly in terms of, both the way that they're operating and also, kind of how you highlighted, like their structuring is very different than what's present here in the States.
Right. So the Ministry of State Security is more like a combination of the CIA and the FBI. Mm-hmm. Okay. And in fact, a lot of their work is, not that, a lot of their work in China is very, very focused. In China, all the work is very focused against protecting the party, against dissidents, against people who would object to the party. So even the Ministry of State Security, a lot of their work is very focused on that. Not so much, yes, on the foreign intelligence threat, but the party elements certainly lean on them more to work against threats against the party. They also do a lot of things like debriefings. They go around to industry all the time and brief and debrief them and say, hey, this is what you got to watch out for with the foreigners. This is what you have to be careful of. They do the same thing with in hotels. They recruit informant networks in hotels, the ones that cater to foreigners, right? You might have recalled that from the book. So that's their reach internally against foreigners. Mm-hmm. CIA doesn't do that. CIA is primarily an overseas organization. So it functions overseas. It's very limited in how it works. Typically, in U.S. government positions, that type of thing, overseas, and it doesn't have the powers of arrest at all. Mm-hmm. The MSS does, not only arrest, but incarceration. So the agency doesn't have any authorities in that regard. And as you can imagine, agency has a much stricter code of what it's allowed to do and not. It's not allowed to detain people without charge for months on end. The MSS is. Mm-hmm. No one is compelled to cooperate with the CIA. Not true in the case of the MSS. You're in China, you're compelled to cooperate with them, period. So
I guess continue with that too. In terms of if you were to put, your CIA hat on and look at it from, an operations perspective, is the structuring being so disjointed and segmented, from the state level instead of being kind of all bottlenecked to the CCP itself? Do you think that makes it probably more difficult for them to be able to try to, infiltrate the U.S. and kind of have more successful, espionage operations within the U.S., but also for us, if you were an intelligence officer in the CIA trying to get into China right now and trying to infiltrate the MS or MSS, would that vastly be difficult as well?
Well, what we see with the MSS is sort of interesting. I don't think that it makes it more difficult for that. I think that, again, remember, primacy here is on protecting the party, right? That's the mindset. So, and in that role, believe me, the MSS is a much little brother compared to the Ministry of Public Security, even on collecting information. And the Ministry of Public Security is a little brother compared to the actual party, because as I mentioned, all those companies and, all those state-owned enterprises at provincial levels and such all have party committees which are reporting information to the local party chairs. Okay, so that's a huge information flow. It's I think we had something like 1 out of every 3 people, or 1 out of every 2.5 people in East Germany during the Cold War were reporting on the others, right? So you had like 30-something% of the population reporting. If you would count up, if you're just looking at the Ministry of Public Security, nothing like that. Ministry of State Security, even less. Include the party collection program in that? You're probably up at that level solidly. So internally, a very, very robust structure. What they don't have compared to us is quality control. It's just bizarre. You find, I have read open emails between collectors and the ministry. I know this sounds crazy, but between assets and the Ministry of State Security, saying things like, okay, from now on, we're going to call the MSS bananas, right? Because we don't want to use that in an open email. And the next email is like, when are you delivering the bananas to? I'm like, Did you not think that someone probably saw the email before? It literally is like this. Sometimes it's a clown show. Sometimes it's very, very good tradecraft. Like they have encrypted websites that they have people go and upload and delete things afterwards. Very, very methodical and encrypted. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how in all these espionage cases does the quality of operational tradecraft vary so much? And yet it does. Between the state-owned enterprise or company and the MSS, you would expect it. But you really wouldn't expect it looking at 100 MSS operations to see that type of variance in tradecraft, yet we do.
Mm-hmm. So what is the state-owned, I guess, equivalent as well? Or where is a lot of this information getting targeted into the state-owned agency, if that makes sense?
I'm sorry, can I maybe rephrase that?
Yeah, so what would be, other than the MSS and MPS, for state-specific, or rather CCP-specific, what is that kind of military espionage organization within there as well?
Oh, okay. Well, the CCP is really collecting, again, if you're talking about just the CCP, that apparatus, it's collecting anything that it deems potential threats to the party. Disgruntled people not obeying party edicts. When we had the white paper movement in China a couple of years ago to end COVID, all that's being reported, that's a threat to the CCP. So all that information is reported. People make negative statements. People who are people who throw out their trash when they're not supposed to, literally. All that, that's how pervasive the surveillance is. And all that's brought up to the CCP. So it has a pervasive control over information in society. Now, if you're a foreigner and you're in there, I had a friend who went to a girlfriend's house once, years ago, on college campus, and it wasn't a short time later when people were knocking on the door, who's the foreigner in your place? It was the local committee which came to check out who the foreigner was. That's living in a fishbowl, as it's been called in China. And that's the type of pervasive surveillance that the CCP has. For specifics, you want to go after foreign, threats and people in technology. Hey, so-and-so's dating a foreigner. Pass that to the MSS. Check this out, guys. That's the type of thing that happens, right? So they have pervasive information coming in. They pass very, very specific tasks to the Ministry of State Security or Public Security.
Yeah, because the reason I was asking that is because, as you highlighted, you're saying if you look at 100 MSS cases, there could be like vast differences in the skill set and the way that the operations are actually conducted. And it just has me curious if the party itself identifies individuals that they want to train further, focus further, be able to kind of, create, because again, they're trying to create it. You see this in every communist society, is that there's always varying levels of trust, right? And they pick someone to trust to spy on their spies, So
there are two kind of segments of that. The information that the CCP gets in from party members, and what they do is they provide incentives, right? You're going to get paid. They provide literally capitalist incentives, for people to report stuff, or just getting good in with the party. You see a number of people in the United States, in Korea, in Japan, people of just Chinese citizens who have been flying drones over U.S. Aircraft carriers, submarines, construction sites, naval construction sites, etc. Or people, over 100 cases of people driving in through the gates on military bases. Why? Are you going to get that much information, different from what the satellites are picking up? Well, the deal is they go back to the CCP and they say, I risked everything to get you this. And they stand in better with the party, which means their business opportunities are better, which means they're held in higher esteem, locally. They're a true believer and a true nationalist for China. And China's that you can even see this online as people are just bashing Japan and bashing other places. They're called little pinks across the world. They don't want to go back to China, but they'll certainly work for China, overseas, because the incentive system is set up in China, for party members, for people to do things to support the party, right? So you get a lot of that happening. And, is it espionage? Well, Sort of, they do violate laws and they do things like that. But most are they getting paid for it? Were they trained for it? Nope. They're just doing it for the prestige and for the recognition internally in China. So to better their lives and better positions.
And kind of brings it back to that whole society approach. It's like
right. And that's exactly where, they provide the incentive system to do that. We have a guy, Patrick Way, who is on trial now. And machinist mate in the Navy, on trial in San Diego for espionage. And the FBI has phone conversations between him and his mother, saying, you should do this. Do this, you'll get a great job in China. And he's, I know, I can do this. I'll get a good job. And, so he laughs, I have shipmates that are driving Uber at night and I just have to sell secrets. So it's kind of an interesting belief system. I mean, do it, you'll get a good job in China. Literally, is he saying this? I mean, a month later, he actually gets his U.S. citizenship coming in. It doesn't, in that Confucian mindset, the law, and you find this a lot in China. This is kind of a key thing. I teach counterintelligence often. I mean, I've taught over 1,000 counterintelligence agents at this point, and an equal number of insider threat people in industry. And one of the things you have to get to understanding is the concept of law as it is in the West, of a legal structure, doesn't exist in China. They say it does. They pretend it does. They show it to the West like it does. But the legal system, the courts exist under the Chinese Communist Party, right? No one was ever arrested for espionage in China and then found not guilty. Never happened. Never, in 70 years since a party, that has never happened. And it's because, and everyone breaks the law. It's because they, in a humanistic Confucian society, you're really not bound by law. Everything is personal relationships, interpersonal relationships. So no surprise when people come here, it's a rude awakening for them in the U.S. that, wait a minute, I can't do this. I can't, okay, well, whose house do I go to fix it? I actually arrested a guy who said that. Whose house do we have to go to fix this? And I'm translating between him and a bunch of agents. And they go, what the hell is he talking about? He thinks we're going to take him to someone's house and he can discuss it and give that person some money and, and get cut loose. And, I got a bunch of special agents roaring because they can't comprehend it, but I understood it. That's kind of normal mindset that you're dealing with.
Do you think that corruption in itself can really undermine China? I mean, at the state level, we constantly hear it, they're taking bribes, they're pushing this, pushing that. I mean, what effect does that have on their security apparatus, or does it have any? Well,
we've got to, that's another good question there. I say we got to be very careful not to put a Western and particularly an American stamp on this. Oh, they're corrupt. The people are going to revolt. Well, they've been corrupt for quite a long time, okay? And that's your definition of corruption, not theirs. So keep that in mind, right? In a lot of China, that's just business. That's how you pay local officials. That's always the case. I had a friend, actually, who I went to George Washington with, and he came back many years later, and he was a mayor of a small town in China. And he said, Nick, you just don't get it. When we talked about issues of corruption, and, like, why not? And he tells me, my wife and I have to crawl in our house below the windows sometimes. I said, he said, crawl, because there's always a line of people out in front, down the block, waiting to give me gifts.
What?
I mean, because they'll wait there all day to give me a gift to curry favor. And, I mean, it literally gets to the point that you have to crawl below the window so they don't see you. So that's China. That's the norm. So that type of action. So, I mean, we would call it corruption immediately. I don't know. I think this is calling it corruption, but, Chinese have a saying, "能骗就骗." If you can cheat and get away with it, then cheat. So I don't know how, how to even see it sometimes.
I mean, it's so ingrained in society. So do you think the CCP over the past couple of decades then has really made a targeted effort as well to kind of become that instead of it being like China, the CCP is kind of that idealized, end all be all for everyone.
Well, they're certainly trying, excuse me, and they've been more successful than previous times of history because they've delivered. They've delivered on wealth, right? So you can't argue that if you join the CCP, you've got a far better prospect if they accept you on becoming wealthy and advancing in China. Well, up until now. Maybe now, with Trump threatening them so much, maybe people going, okay, this isn't funny.
Yeah.
The gravy train might stop now. So, but they have delivered by and large. I mean, a lot of people have come out of abject poverty. And that just means a lot of people are making more than $1.50 a day or $1.75 a day, according to the UN. So I'm not sure it's a huge leap, but it is definitely a leap for them. So, we'll see. There's a lot yet that has to roll through on this as to what party membership is going to mean, how corrupt. I mean, the Congress passed a law a while ago, and the Biden administration didn't deliver on it, but they're talking about it now and ginning up and pushing the Trump administration. And what they want the intelligence community to do is publish results of Xi Jinping's wealth, his family's wealth. In 2015, Causeway Bookstore in Hong Kong, they were kidnapped. The owners were kidnapped for publishing books like that on Xi Jinping.
Really?
Yeah, kidnapped and brought back to China. One was kidnapped out of Thailand, and two were kidnapped out of Hong Kong. Right? Presumably with those countries acquiescing by the Ministry of Public Security, came in and did those operations. So, so there's a lot that could come out of this. And, if the intelligence community does that and publishes results of Xi Jinping's wealth, because the Congress says, look, that's the way to get at them. Show China exactly how much this guy is worth, the billions his family has stashed. And because he's led such a campaign of anti-corruption, right? 2 million people incarcerated in China are subject to, and now we're not talking about criminals. We're talking about basically corruption, right? In that now, they're not all political enemies. I have 2 million political enemies, but there's a big handful of them. And again, this all gets back to Confucian culture, right? You have what do you want to call it? Networks of individuals like you and I would do for each other. You do this for me, I'll do the guangxi, it's called in Chinese, right? So you do this for me, I'll do this for you. And baked in Confucian culture, we have reciprocity. If you do this for me, Reed, we won't say it, but I'm going to expect you're there to do something for me later on. And this is how you build networks. So the line and block charts don't mean anything. The law doesn't mean anything. It's your relationships, your personal relationships, which mean everything. So of course, when Xi Jinping gets in, the first thing he starts doing is destroying the relationships of the others, of the other networks, the other guangxi networks that are out there. And you start with that because everyone's corrupt, right? They're all, passing money back and forth and sending it out and trying to get it out of China. China is now the number one money laundering country in the world, dealing with the cartels. And the reason is people are trying to get their money out of China.
So they're utilizing cartels.
Yeah.
What does that process look like?
Well, that is the cartel goes to a Chinese handler and says, hey, here's X bazillion dollars. I want to get this money moved, from one place to another, typically to the United States. That cartel person that Chinese person literally puts the money up for sale in China, right? They actually make a profit on it, which is why they charge the cartel so little. And they say, okay, we're going to move $2 million. We'll sell you this $2 million for $2,100,000. And someone says, great, I'll buy it, $2,100,000. And then that money appears, because they have relationships and networks, that money appears in the United States.
Really?
Yeah. So everyone gets, what they want. There's a movement of money, but nothing's official. It's always done. Tell you the truth, I didn't even know what I was doing at the time. I was in college in Taiwan. So Nick, would you take these red chits to Hong Kong and give it to a friend of mine and, take a bottle of whiskey for yourself? I thought, hey, that was great. Came to learn in later years, well, young and dumb, as they say, but came to learn in later years that those red chits were money transfers, right? It was just done with a chit, instead of that. And turns out that's the way I used to pay, years later in restaurants in the United States, Chinese restaurants in the US, that's the way I paid my bills, for, red chips. Currency, at some point currency was passed, but it was always, humanistic relationship in I trust you for the money, you're going to give it to me or you're going to give it to him, that type of thing. So amazing the way they move money like that.
Yeah, let me ask that because it's crazy too because we're talking about, everything with the cartels is an absolute mess right now. Trump, is talking about special forces going down there, we're labeling terrorist group. Obviously the fentanyl thing, which China I know is a really big part in that.
Right.
But before going into that, I guess, does the U.S. or CIA specifically, or, I guess the FBI could fall in this as well. But do they see this pipeline being created and instead is there an opportunity for the U.S. or they have made moves to become that middleman instead of it being the cartels? Because obviously you're draining China and if the money's coming in the U.S., it's somewhat of a net positive. You're getting the money out of, China coming to the U.S. There's some difficulty.
It is. So the deal is that China has a limit. I think it's 50,000, 25 or 50,000 money that you can send out of the country. But of course, as things get bad, the multi-millionaires want stuff
everything
out. Right? They want to, put a handout. There are some issues with the E5B visa, in which case you have to invest in the United States. And when you invest in the United States with that visa and employ something like a dozen people, X hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, then you get a green card. You can come over, or family members get a green card. So, but that's tough, particularly when you're moving dirty funds. And China's moved a lot of corrupt funds over. So, this evolution, and just Chinese people were brilliant in the way they executed it, right? Everyone got discounted. They took advantage of the fact people want to move money out of the country. They did it quietly, so that it's set up a substructure. I don't know. First off, CIA, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure they're clueless about it. The FBI is engaged with it. I've actually consulted the DEA on it. They're very engaged in it. So, FBI and DEA are very aggressively looking at it. And I'm sure Treasury is as well, right? FinCEN, the Financial Intelligence Center. But it's a difficult thing. You're tracking down. This is where AI comes in as you start to track down those types of funds that move globally. And, hopefully they have access to you. And then you start adding in things like blockchain, right? Where it goes into multiple accounts, basically. Yeah, and you don't know who's behind them. You just have a number. It's a pretty complex and difficult thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just, because if they could find a way to essentially, because right now, if we blow up the cartels and who knows how that money is going to start getting transferred, and it's you'd be surprised that, they're not down there making a cartel and, trying to help with moving around and stuff. But you brought up AI there, and I'd love to actually talk about the surveillance state with how China's starting to implement AI into facial recognition software and everything. Mm-hmm. Can you maybe detail that as well? Because it's weird. Whenever you bring that up on places like Twitter, you'll get the Marxist, super leftist people be like, that's actually all propaganda. And when it's just very clearly not. And, you highlighted in this book, they're leading the technology.
Yeah,
in that.
Yeah, they clearly are. And, a lot of that, it's not so much theft. There is theft. We have a case recently with I forgot his name. Within the past few months, of an individual who stole allegedly stole AI from Google and trying to start multiple companies in China based on that AI. So we have clear cases of them stealing AI research and other ones. We also have IBM who invested $58 billion into AI development in China, using Chinese research firms to do it. We have MIT who did a joint AI facial recognition development program with SenseTime, Chinese company, right? Which was the number one contractor for that to the Ministry of Public Security. So all the facial recognition stuff and things like that were joint development between MIT and SenseTime.
Really?
Yeah. So, there are other cases, Cisco and many, many others that have been giving China, who are paying China to develop the technology. The rates are so much cheaper, than it would be in the United States. So they've been paying to have that type of AI development done in China. So, no surprise that they've caught up to us in most areas. I mean, I wouldn't say all, and some areas surpassed us. So they're certainly caught up. And as you see on a large scale, let's talk about that domestic surveillance application. So the way China's Ministry of Public Security actually divides up cities is in a 10-block radius, okay? 10 blocks by 10 blocks, 10 blocks by 10 blocks by, each one of those is like one of their sectors that they look. And there's CCTVs all over. All the housing is labeled with the codes. What do you call them?
Oh,
QR
yeah,
codes.
QR code.
Right, QR
Really?
codes so the cop goes by, click, I know the 5 people who should be living here, right? It's QR
Really?
code. Yeah. Businesses are done the same way. If someone pulls, even so much as someone pulls up a truck on the sidewalk and starts offloading, the CCTVs, because there's one CCTV for every 2 people in China. Okay. So about a little short of that, but the CCTVs will pick up the license plate, and the response time for police is down to like 20 seconds in some places, right? They show up immediately and say, you're not allowed to be dumping here. You're not allowed to be doing that. Here's a fine. No, it wasn't me. And they show them the video. So it was you. Here's your fine. So as a measure of policing, this actually started in Tibet and then moved to Xinjiang, this concept where they've cut down police response time from 20 minutes to literally a couple of minutes. And here it's used because all that data comes in, AI processes it, and then tells the policeman nearby exactly what's going on and literally what has to be done. And if you talk to China about it, and the reason people aren't too upset with something like this, because it actually cuts down on the corruption. It cuts down on the cops shaking people down, which they were notorious for doing that. So everything's on video. The cop doesn't. Cop just goes and enforces at this point. So it's an interesting system that they put into place. This system goes back to what's his name, Norbert Wiener, who wrote a book about this in 1948, and I'll remember the name of the book in a minute. But so he writes about this in 1948, how you can have a living system between human beings and technology, where each one learns. If you have the sensors, right, monitor human behavior, and then that can feed back into a giant mechanism, and then that mechanism can alter the human behavior, providing incentives or carrot and stick to change the human behavior, and you literally create Dianetics. Maybe it's, I don't know if it was. No,
It does sound familiar, but
yeah, I'll have to remember it. And then you can put it up, like I'm sure some of your
pop it
guests are
up,
going to pop up, put it up after. But so picture this. The concept is you do on a nationwide scale that people are integrated with the technology, right? So they do something wrong, the sensors pick it up, and ultimately, enough of the people are doing this wrong. We are either going to change policy or we got to start education programs to change them and their thinking, right? This living relationship between technology and humans. Problem was they never had the technology to do it. Nobody ever had the technology to do it. There was a guy, the head of Xie Shuixin, the head of China's rocket program, who parrots on this and writes a couple of articles on it when he gets to China. Mao was thrilled with it. That's exactly what we need to do, because Mao was paranoid about, overthrows. So over generations, they never had the technology to do it. They employed people in place of machines. Mm-hmm. So they had everything from the granny patrols to the neighborhood patrols to the company committees, that would all monitor and watch for protection of the CCP, neighborhood committees, all that type of stuff that would watch. And they would do it by humans to replace the technology. But now they've elevated, thanks to us, thanks to the US, because we gave it to them. When we went in a global war on terror, where were all the CCTVs made? Where were all the sensors made? Mm-hmm. Well, that was our money, and they made them in China, right? So, who's responsible for the surveillance state? Actually, it's us. So, but now they actually can do it with technology, and they are realizing, and this was taught in cadre schools for decades, right? You got to be a senior cadre. This was taught as the vision that we wanted for China. So they're actually, it's by no means pervasive, right? It's operating in cities, and it'll be the next decade or two, shaking it out. But starting in 2008, with what they call the Big Intelligence Program for the National Police, National Police Service, they starting with then, that's when they started introducing this on a big scale, all interlocking databases, everything comprehensively to know about Reed, right? Driver's license, medical records, surveillance footage, whether he walks in a gate, what clothes he buys, how much, what time you surf on internet, what websites you go into, all this compiled for everyone in one place. And then the AI saying, well, how much of a risk is Reed? Where should we put him on a scale of risk? Because he was looking at that foreign website, and you know what? The eye tracking movement shows he was actually reading, or the monitoring of the keystrokes, which they do, will show he was actually typing on these things. So we know he just didn't leave it and walk away, right? So all that is done. It's mind-blowing to get your head around.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing, I want to call it an amazing accomplishment, but it's
horrifying, but amazing.
Horrifying, yeah.
How advanced is their facial recognition technology at this point?
Best in the world. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that much is pretty well beyond dispute.
And what would be the general capabilities of it, as we understand?
A lot of what AI is, a lot of what facial recognition is based on two things: accuracy and distance. Mm-hmm. Right? Whether you can do it, what distance do you have to be able to do that? There are other components of not just facial recognition, gait, exactly how you walk. People are tracked and based simply on that, and that's pervasive worldwide. So I would say that it is in my particular area of expertise. However, all the police officials I know that have gone to China have just said this is over the top, better than anything I've seen. Mm-hmm. So,
does it worry you from a domestic or U.S. security perspective, and the fact that things like TikTok, and we were talking about earlier, use facial recognition and use that?
Well, you can see why the U.S. reacts the way it does, because all of a sudden now if you have routers that are from China, you have the possibility of all these data, CCTVs that are from China, robots that are from China collecting. You have all the possibilities of this saying, oh, that's Nick Eftimiades. He's walking on Fifth Avenue. And, I know to people that comes along as crazy, but technology-wise, it's doable, and it's actually what's happening.
Yeah.
So that's, so it's, it has profound impacts on intelligence. How are you going to walk down the street in Kinshasa when all the CCTVs are reporting back your location and saying, oh, God, we haven't seen Nick there forever? And I mean, it's immediate. So it's just absolutely pervasive, and it's, we don't know how to deal with it. We don't have law to deal with it. We don't have countermeasures to deal with it. So the system is reacting, and our political system, and the way it reacts is to say, well, wait a minute, whoa, we can't have them installing this in here. Mm-hmm. And by the way, neither can you, Brits or, French or Germans and stuff. And this is why.
That was the issue with Huawei, yeah. What was that again? What happened?
So there are two things. I mean, Huawei had a lot of its 5G equipment coming into the United States, coming in globally, okay? And the U.S. started to come to this realization that, wait a minute, not only are they able to collect in this way, but they're able to stop and manipulate data. And I'll give you an example. In Kansas, of why that becomes important. In Kansas, there was a company, Benefit something or other. I forgot it is, Beautiful Benefits or something, kind of weird name like that. And but what they did was using AI for stock investments. One of the what's the better investment here? Where to put the money? One of the engineers there figures out that it takes 48 milliseconds for the information to get from the World Trade Center to Kansas. Okay? And in that 48 milliseconds, right, they lose money. They lose hundreds of dollars, because if they had invested a lot quicker,
they would have caught.
The money and movement up, and that adds up across a wide spectrum of investments and dollars in every investment. So they actually moved that part of the business to Jersey, right across the street from World Trade Center. Mm-hmm. When this gets out publicly, everyone goes bonkers, And the World Trade Center actually has to set up a process where information, I still don't know exactly how they did it, now that we don't have a World Trade Center, but they had to set up, the stock exchange had to set up a way that the information was sent out all at the same time to everyone. So why does this become important? Well, because you can capture the stock market if you can take your devices, which are all transmitting the 5G, slow that up for half a second, slow that up for a millisecond, speed that, slow the utilities up for a millisecond. We'll put our investments into here. I mean, it's all machine done, and you can literally capture an entire market in stocks if you can manipulate that. And that was a threat with the 5G networks coming up. The surveillance, the encryption, I always say, it'll touch off a war of encryption. Not a huge deal. I mean, at some point,
they do it all the time. Yeah.
Right. At some point, they'll decrypt it. And, the Russians have 40 years of us talking to each other in encryption, collecting it, just waiting for the time that they could decrypt it and figure out what the hell was going on all that time. But now you can manipulate, things coming from utility companies. You can manipulate stocks. You can manipulate, any type of financial movements and transactions to capitalize on them. That becomes a huge threat.
That's crazy. I'd never heard that. But yeah, if you have access to all that, not only are you siphoning money, but you can start playing with, what readings people are getting, everything, and
Absolutely.
Crash an economy like it's nothing.
You can crash an economy. You can crash a company. You can crash. And, I'm briefing this to Congress. It was like the lights went on. Like, what? Who's responsible for this? Yeah. Well, actually, you are, sir. What the heck?
I guess bringing it now, sticking to U.S. stateside, one of the most infamous examples would be the spy balloon from 2023. Mm-hmm. Honestly, although that hit, the news cycle for a week straight, we saw it get blown out of the sky. It was constantly talked about. I really feel like what actually was the point of it, or what it actually accomplished, has never really been talked about, or really doesn't get in much detail. So to the level you can, for one, what was it? And two, what was it looking to accomplish?
Okay. So a couple of things. First off, the fact it was never really disclosed, I think, is insulting to American democracy, because Congress asked for that. They're the elected representatives of the people. The administration wouldn't reveal it. Mm-hmm. And the reason the administration wouldn't reveal it is because it didn't want a public reaction against China. So you're really doing China's work by hiding China. You're helping them hide behind this, from what they've done, not releasing data. I think that's, someone in Congress once told me, if you're lying to the American public, you probably shouldn't be doing what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's the Biden administration. I hope the Trump administration will release that more than they have. So what you find, though, is that take a balloon that's 60,000 feet. Well, if you're hovering over a military base, look, there are two types of transmissions that you're only going to get if you're sitting in the beam. Okay. One is long wave transmissions, right? That go part of the earth, and they go from us to naval forces. They're usually basically used for long distance. They bounce off the ionosphere, and they're used for long distance communication. So you have to be in the path to be able to catch those, which is the threat from farms and things like that, military bases. The other ones, of course, are communicating with satellites. You don't know what we're communicating to our satellites, the ones overhead, because you're not within the beam. You're not within the transmission beam. You park a balloon over there, you are in the transmission beam. So you can collect, at a minimum, you can collect the communications between our space assets and our ground assets, and our bases. In that role, you can communicate, you can collect the transmissions that are going for long wave transmissions, right? Out to sea for commands and things like that. Atmospheric levels, okay? The different sort of levels or layers of atmosphere, densities, humidity, things like that. You actually need that for missiles, right? So you collect that so that you can calibrate your missiles to be effective in coming through those atmospherics. So number two. Number three, high resolution imaging. You can take pictures from a satellite, but there's no way a satellite's going to get a high resolution imaging of things like critical infrastructure power plants, electric plants. And I'll point out that guys were just arrested in the Philippines. Chinese were just arrested in the Philippines for doing that, for imaging and collecting against critical infrastructure in the country. Okay, so you have number 3, the collect against critical infrastructure or military facilities, the same way with high resolution imagery. Number 4, 60,000 feet. If you drop off a drone, an unmanned drone, you're looking at about, assuming a 10-to-1 glide ratio, drop ratio, you're looking at about 110 miles that a glider could go. So let's say you dump off half a dozen gliders, which are designed to transmit, they pick up emissions from a nuclear plant, or they pick up emissions from some factory that's producing something for the military, right? And the glider collects those things, and when a Chinese satellite passes, beams them up. And that's what espionage is like.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's I would have done it if I was them.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I would have done. And and then go hunt down the gliders. Have a good time finding it.
Mm-hmm. Were you surprised about how almost blatant they were with the balloon?
Yeah, strikingly surprised. I couldn't believe it. I was really shocked, and particularly on the eve of the Secretary of State visiting. What the heck? You've got to be kidding me! Doing that. I mean, the previous ones they did, typically these things aren't detected because they go with the current, with the draft, and the systems are calibrated, to see things that are moving fast, moving different against the standard background noise of the current. In this case, they're just coming in with that. But there are a lot of huge problems. The fact that they were able to get in several times undetected, or at least unnoticed. Not the least of which is, okay, what if the next one has a sarin attack planned in it? And I'm not just talking China, but what if that's the inspiration for a terrorist attack that way? We've got a gaping hole in security, and the U.S. government is completely flat on its back. I mean, it had a responsibility to do better, period.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think there was such a delay in shooting it down? Were we trying to study it? Was it or were we just...
I don't know. I mean, you can make the argument we didn't want it dropping on anyone's head. I mean, it was the size of a few school buses. But I don't know on that one.
So let's continue into the recruitment process and motivations, and kind of highlighting with Mice versus Beware. You highlighted Beware within the book, which actually I thought was such an interesting way to establish it, because Mice, previous CIA operatives we've had on the podcast have highlighted that as well. It's something that's pretty fundamental to espionage, but it's definitely just like with AI, just like with all the aspects, the way espionage is conducted and recruitment's done is evolving. So can you maybe key those differences? So
MICE is the acronym that's typically used, not only in the U.S., but every English-speaking intel service is money, like coercion, ego, and ideology. Money, ideology, coercion, ego. MICE. And that's what, over decades, that's what we see recruitment for espionage, falling down to. Well, it's one of those things. It's either a person's doing it for money, or they ideologically believe in it, they're being coerced into it, or, somehow their ego is being played into, and that's why they're doing it. And the counterintelligence apparatus was fine. And I'll tell you how Beware came about, which is the new acronym for looking at Chinese espionage. And I have a series of online courses on Chinese espionage, right? One of the basic ones, like 12 hours long. And so I asked, before I released these things, I vetted them, and I asked a bunch of counterintelligence people to look at it. And one of the guys writes back to me and says, Nick, you should have included MICE in this. And I just thought to myself, I said, oh, what the hell? MICE doesn't have anything to do with it. Wait a minute, MICE doesn't have anything to do. It really doesn't, does it? And so I had to think of an acronym that described the full breadth of all China's espionage. Let's call it espionage with a little e, okay? Not just 18 USC 790 series stealing secrets, right? But their economic espionage, their covert action that they conduct, covert influence, all those things across the board. And I came up with the acronym BEWARE, which is business. that they first use business to entice people to can do commercial or economic espionage, ethno-nationalism. And the reason that one is specific is because it's not really nationalism. No one ever spied for the CCP, right? They spy because they're Chinese. I believe in Mother China. So it's more of an ethno-nationalism than it is a straight nationalism. Mm-hmm. There's wealth. People just do it for the money. Half the espionage cases by the Ministry of State Security are, people just doing it for the money. Okay, 24% or so are ethno-nationalism. Okay, academics. Part of Confucianism is a scholar is highly renowned in society. It's highly renowned in China today. You're a scholar, and even the decades of Mao Zedong existed where scholars were wearing dunce caps and everything. It wasn't able to crush that out of Confucian society. Mm-hmm. So being a scholar in China is a huge honor. And it's a big deal. You get a big house and, you're revered by people. Oh, can I get your cars or your bicycle? It's just, and that's a Confucian-based system of learning. So education is so important in China that they send their kids by the hundreds of thousands overseas to get an education because they value that more than anything. And what that winds up with is academic credentials are sometimes used as barter for espionage. So I steal intellectual property, I steal something from a university, maybe something I've helped work on, but I take all the research and I go back to China, and I've seen this multiple times where people saying, I want an associate professorship. And the university said, no, we'll make you an assistant professor for this. But you have to come and you have to publish this stuff under your name. And no, I want to be an associate professor and they'll actually use academic positions as payment for a person bringing research into China. Okay? Academics. Repression. This is typical what we know about repression. And to be honest, that repression or coercion is pretty minimal. It applies mostly to the dissident groups, to people believe in democracy or freedom, Taiwan, Falun Gong, etc. Against them, coercion or repression is very, very common. But in the grand scheme of the whole pie of a whole of society approach and all those different subject areas, it's not. And the last is emotional bonds. So you'll do it to support your family. I've seen a number of cases of doing it to support professors because, again, that Confucian relationship builds such a tight relationship with your professor and it's one of the screening factors, I use when people are in sensitive positions. So wait a minute, his professor won 3 awards for national security technology development. The only thing that professor has to do is where, he was his PhD mentor, is call and say, I'd really like you to get this for me. Mm-hmm. And the guy will do it, just out of not saving face and out of the cultural requirement for him to do so. We've seen a number of cases like that. So take all those. The acronym is BEWARE.
Mm-hmm. So the academic one is so interesting because I think people don't really realize how ingrained China is in a lot of the academic institutions here. I mean, can you break that down kind of further? I mean, it's not only with infiltrating and finding, research, but it's even funding. It's even creating all those aspects, right? And
it's, just not too long ago, Huawei had funded 90,000 in through a nonprofit organization I forgot the name of it, in Washington, D.C., and they were distributing it out for technology development. So, you see this type of thing constantly. Oh, you can't take money from Huawei directly? We'll put it into a front company, then we'll put it into a U.S. NGO, and then it'll be here. And the U.S. NGO said publicly it's not illegal. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot more than 90,000. I forgot how much it was. So, these types of things for investments of China into academia for technology development are pervasive. Now, some places have pushed back on that a bit. There has been a running feud, I'll call it, with the Department of Education, who I worked with DOE initially on it. They were, and I believe still are, completely flat on their back. They would demand that universities live up to, the law in providing funding. Okay, well, this is coming from a Chinese company. What does that mean? Mm. And we have no answers. Department of Education had no answers for them. So a lot of this is just slipping through the cracks. So a company gets on the denied list from Department of Commerce. No, you can't ship technology. Oh, okay. Let's go invent it with, William and Mary University, for example, or many other universities. Let's just go put investment funds in there, and they'll develop the technology.
Is there also a worry too of, we were talking about this with TikTok, that they're also investing in thought as well. So they're able to kind of push society in a way that is more favorable to China. So, conversations are in favor of China. And,
that's certainly the fear with the cognitive warfare. And I mean, there are PLA studies on cognitive warfare. And, I've seen a couple of those studies which hit the internet. And then, we can do this. And then China whooped them off, wished them off the internet immediately. But it is an aggressive area of study for, as conflict goes, as is biological warfare. I mean, some of the crazy things, you look at their biological warfare concepts are, we can put this in bullets and weaken a person. And then if I remember the terminology correctly, being magnanimous, give them the antidote if they comply with our things. I mean, that's okay. We don't want to be murderers of everything. We'll infect the population. And, if they comply with what we're telling them, we'll give them antidotes. So it occurs on a physical level and a mental level. The only reason it isn't working, is because China's been just such idiots in implementing their foreign policy. I mean, they got this wolf warrior thing going.
Yeah.
And the whole world turned against them. I mean, much outside of the developing world, but everyone turned against them. They were herding blacks through the streets in China, during COVID, saying that they were the ones responsible, and literally herding them through the streets, taking them out of their apartments and herding them through the streets. How do you think that played out in Africa? Not very well.
Yeah.
So they do stupid things and they get caught in it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of a good segue into the Belt and Road Initiative as well, because that's obviously been a very complex program, but one that has had both positives for China and kind of, developing their future, but then also worldwide, like seeing some of the stuff that's also come out of there has really changed the view on how China's, some people like to think that's, they're just giving them free loans, when that's just nowhere near the case. Like,
right.
What exactly, can you speak to that in a little more detail, but what exactly is the Belt and Road Initiative?
Sure.
And also how it's changed probably over the past, couple of years as well?
Right. Belt and Road Initiative initially came out in 2012 or 2013, I think it was, when Xi Jinping announced it. And it coincided with a drop in China's steel industry and their construction industry. The bubble was starting to go on that. At one time prior to that, they had 8,000 construction cranes working in Beijing, right? 8,000 of them. If you can imagine what type of development.
Can you imagine what that looked like?
Yeah. They made more concrete in less than a decade than the United States had in 150 years, right? To give you an idea what that development was like. But then it started to peter off. And they immediately wound up with more than 500,000 unemployed people. Well, how do you employ unemployed people like that in construction? You give them to the world. So what China did was you gotta love this. I mean, it's just brilliant. They say, tell you what, we're gonna loan you the money for Project ABC. Build a port, build a secondary city around that port for manufacturing, light manufacturing and transportation, all those types of things to get your economy, to juice it up and get it going. Okay? You pay that. Now, the beauty of this is that the money never leaves Beijing, right? Country A says, great, that sounds like a great idea. Here's the money, we're obligated to the money to you. China turns around and pays that money to the contractor and says, you go do this in there. And the money, stays within the Chinese side of it. Now, the catch here is that money was supposed to open up a lot of jobs and skills and training for, the emerging world. Really hasn't. It's opened up some, and that's why Chinese have been assassinated in Pakistan and throughout Africa, because they didn't come through. No, they're just shipping Chinese companies over there, hundreds of Chinese companies, to go, build those things without employing the local population. So the local population's getting in debt. They're getting trains built and all that, train tracks, but they're getting
But
in
owned
debt.
by China too.
Yeah, and how are you going to pay for that? Because now you get to sell, you get to make food and serve it to the construction workers. That's your part of this. So, and clothes and things like that. So it isn't quite as advertised. And the way China's got around that is by bribing officials to say, and I have lists of officials that were bribed in different contracts, right? So 10% or so goes for the bribing of the officials, bank officials, and for the loans and things. So this has been the way the Belt and Road has worked. There are a couple of problems. Hasn't been, as you know, there's been a lot of resentment, particularly after COVID. Countries were unable to keep up with payments. So that hit everybody hard. And China, actually, to its credit, restructured a lot of the loan payments. Countries didn't often know what they were doing. They didn't have the expertise to know from the economics and the city planning and the rural planning, what they actually needed. So China would say, oh, we'll build this and we'll build that and we'll build a road and build a road. And they said, great. You know what? Reality is they don't need all that. They only needed 25% of that. And yet they wound up for paying that things for actually benefited China, roads to China and things like that in South Asia and Southeast Asia, things that benefited China more than it did.
I know they built a lot of ports, right? That is a percentage owned by China and whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And if they fall, the whole thing's owned by China. And by the way, that they asked for basing rights for military military ships to be able to visit there. So all those commercial ports are done to the caliber where military ships can visit. Deep water, where military ships can visit. So China, even though they call it commercial ports all over the world, ostensibly extends their military reach and capability globally. The other things that for other countries like the U.S. are concerned is that the payments are all done by these countries. Payments are all done by the renminbi, the Chinese yuan, their currency. So I give it to you and you say, okay, we're building this, our dam is being built. And you run back and say, okay, well, here's this US dollars. I want it in Chinese currency. And what that does is over 100 countries, it internationalizes China's currency, which is what they're seeking to do through this project, right? Let's get everybody using the Chinese currency and we'll eventually supplant the US dollar. That's what BRICS is all about. And that's what they're trying to leverage the Belt and Road to do. So, military dynamic of being able to have ports and, collection, an intelligence component of it, because they have a national intelligence program that supports the Belt and Road Initiative. So all the Chinese, what they call private security companies and stuff like that, all report intelligence that goes through that. And it's called National Intelligence Program that goes under the Belt and Road Initiative. There is a space component of it, right? So they, because how these hundreds and hundreds of Chinese companies communicating, how the government's communicating, China says, you know what, use our space networks. For governments, we'll sell you time on our space networks, dirt cheap. So all the port operations, all the policing operations, all the military operations using drones and everything, all go through China's networks. All the CCTVs that China puts, Huawei and I forgot the other company. Huawei puts down, throughout Africa. All those things go through China.
Yeah.
Right? They say no, it doesn't, but it's been proven time and again that it does. So imagine the vast quantities of information that go everywhere from drones to radio links to CCTVs or facial recognition, all being pumped up through their space networks. And of course, China taking a piece of that. They've actually democratized space for the planet.
Yeah. They're essentially creating a whole area of the world where the U.S. can't operate, or if they do, they have to be constantly looking over their shoulder.
Right. Right. And that's it. And a lot of the African countries in particular are thrilled about it, because they're giving them educational opportunities, they're bringing them to Chinese universities, they're bringing space programs and engineering, they're training the next generation of engineers in those countries. So people actually have a future. They're looking at now spaceports in Africa to put into place. People actually, they actually have a future, and China's doing a great job in that sense. So,
do you think that there's a viable opportunity by China to undermine the U.S. dollar by just these countries that are currently utilized, or do you think they need a Europe or those areas?
They'll ultimately do it. If that's a stupid statement, but if things go unchecked or uncorrected, if the current glide path were to continue, they would probably get to that point.
Well, so that kind of begs, because it feels like the U.S. isn't super, or at least American people, there's probably a lot more discussion behind closed doors, but America isn't very keyed in on, undermining those investment opportunities and saying, hey, come invest with us. Like, not only are we not trying to screw you over, but we're trying to, it works for us too. So do you think that there will be a call for that once we or do you think it'll almost be too late by the time we do recognize?
Well, going back to like 1990s, there was a group at my house that met, and we formed what was called the Blue Team in Washington, right? Mm-hmm. And this were people that were trying to put a check on how aggressively the U.S. got in bed with the CCP. Right? And there was a massive propaganda effort that went on for decades from the Chinese Communist Party saying, no, it's a couple of hardliners don't want to do this, but we're liberalizing, we're opening for business and this and that. And the American, and it goes to this day, sorry, it gets to your question, American policy has been characterized by ignorance, arrogance, and greed, right? We're ignorant of what the true intentions of the CCP was. We were arrogant in every policymaker thinking, inside of every Chinese person is a freedom-loving American dying to get out, And there was greed. Businesses were making money. Politicians were getting money left and right? All those donations that came in, from businesses that were doing business in China, it was overwhelming. So is it too late? Which gets to kind of your question. I don't know. The 20s up till 30 will be the point. And to be honest, it'll be interesting to see how Trump plays this. Mm-hmm. If he has a longer term view and an understanding that they're not kidding around and they will do this for decades, or if it's for him, it's just transactional. We'll do this and they'll cut that. Well, wait a minute. You better have mechanisms in place to shore, and the Congress better say, if you're making that trade deal, you're reporting every year whether they're living up to it. Mm-hmm. Right? Because that's what they did last time. They made a trade deal and then they didn't live up to it. They're fine making agreements. Oh, it's a legal document. Who cares? They're fine signing something, but not living up to it. So lots of mechanisms have to change, and we have to be a little better than the, look for 2 minutes ahead of us, a little better in long range thinking of how we're going to deal with it.
So let me bring it back to, when we were talking about operations within the U.S., can you break down how they look to recruit, or recruitment approaches are currently looking like?
Yeah, that there's actually been a big change in the recruitment process. We still see occasional meets in the United States, but that's going back years. That's rare. And the new target, particularly if you're talking about national security stuff, right? The new target has been younger military. It's been online. And not only recruitment, but handled online. So Thomas Zhao, a Navy enlisted who's serving time in prison now in Leavenworth, was recruited online in a WeChat, and WeChat's a Chinese app, was recruited in a WeChat group on stock investments. Mm. And he was part of that group. He was playing stocks, and ultimately got to know a guy who pretended to be from a maritime research institute. They got to know, and then ultimately he wound up paying Zhao for information, and Zhao slipped into conducting espionage. Completely online, right? Paid through PayPal. The relationship was through Telegram. Never saw the guy, before, right? We had the kid Patrick Way, same case. A guy by the name of Corbin Schultz, sergeant, who just got convicted. Same thing. So we're seeing this pattern of approaching and recruiting online through social media. LinkedIn, Facebook are the primaries. WeChat was an exception, at least one that I've seen. B, the person is ultimately recruited online, first asked to provide unclassified information, general information, provide a report. You interested in us paying you $1,500 for a report on, the U.S. relationship with such and such. A number of those reports go by, and the person's ultimately encouraged and pushed more and more to provide what they call non-public information. So pushing the person more, eventually the person slides into supplying classified information. And by the time they do that, they're kind of on the hook. The nature of the relationship turns clandestine, right? We're not on Facebook anymore. Now we're using a Russian app, Telegram, or, that the more likely one, which is not only encrypted but controlled by Russia, so the U.S. ain't getting in. They're setting up websites so that people can upload data onto an encrypted website, and it's safe from that. There are a lot of other security, OPSEC, operation security measures that China puts into it. But we've seen a number of cases in the past 2 to 3 years, that have been all online. And I would venture to say, and the Brits announced that 20,000 people had been approached through LinkedIn, and some in successful recruitments had been done as well. Many had been, Germans said the same thing, 10,000 in Germany, again saying that many had provided information, 9,000 in France. So now you can sit in a room, use AI to target, those information, or the people who are close to those people, that you want to get information from, and do it all online.
Mm-hmm. So they're a majority recruitment these days then, so it's coming from online. So there's no longer really on the ground operatives. And I mean, I'm sure there are, but to the level what espionage used to be. It's very much. Yeah.
It's a completely changed game. Dixon Yo, who was another guy recruited by China in Singapore through his university, in fact, he took the name, stole the name of a company, Resolute Consulting, and using that name, recruited people in LinkedIn and got 400 resumes of people with clearances passed to the MSS, and was tasking out papers, and they was getting State Department officials writing about the Secretary of State, and military officials writing about U.S. capabilities and things like that, all supposedly unclassified. But you saw a very methodical process in trying to get these people to provide more and more and more. So it's cost efficient, and they're scared to death of counterintelligence. Mm-hmm. So why risk it? Also, people traveling to China. It used to be people, they would do a lot of debriefings in China. They still do. But that is typically more ethnic Chinese that they're doing that with, because it's a tough time for someone to explain multiple trips to China to be debriefed. So it's much cheaper, doing it online. And they're targeting younger people too, younger and retired.
Are the two and that, it seems like as well from a CIA or FBI perspective, like not only are the fundamentals different abroad, so how you may be wanting to operate in terms of intelligence gathering, but now counterintel is a whole different ballgame as well. Like it seems like both agencies have to be scrambling to a whole new dynamic.
It is, and they are. And to be honest, there's very little expertise in the intelligence community, like what I've told you about Confucian-based and what, how you work with that in dealing with Chinese assets or investigations or stuff. Very, very small knowledge base. In the days of the Soviet Union, we had 5,000 people in the military trained as Soviet area experts. Got a handful. I mean, lots of people are running into the field and dealing with China now, but there are a lot of one-book wonders. They've read a book or two on China. They've read my book, and and they're an expert. I've actually seen that. Where, the training academy I used to teach, a joint counterintelligence training academy. All the instructors there, like 20 of them, signed up for my course. And I thought, you're the instructors, and that your base of knowledge is just that course. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's good, but doesn't show a lot of in-house expertise.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I know they're trying, but we got a ways to go to and again, as you pointed out, how do you deal with now the change that it's online? Mm-hmm. How do you work with LinkedIn? It's a lot of training has to be provided to our younger military members and the retirees. A lot has to be done to restructure and to get in a better relationship, even with private industry, because we're not used to that.
It seems like the concern as well. I mean, we started off the conversation with this economic versus military espionage. I mean, it seems like a bulk of their espionage efforts in one way or another are more economic. Would you say that's the case? And then with that, if so, would you say that's because they just don't see a ground war being realistic, but more so an economic war?
I could actually break that down for you. Mm-hmm. I think about, as you look at it, 25% or so is economic. about 40% or so is theft of technology, meaning illegal exports. I distinguish that from economic espionage. And the majority of the rest of it is either espionage or covert action. And by covert action, we have a law in the United States, FARA, Foreign Agents Registration Act. It actually came into being in the 1930s to stop the German propaganda, coming into the United States. That's how old it is. Nothing digital is in there. Nothing, got to be physically located in the U.S. So it's crazy that we still have it the way it is. But what the FBI typically calls that is espionage light, right? It's because all espionage is not stealing secrets. Like I steal a secret. Okay, who's maintaining the safe house? Who's the courier? Who's, what if I'm just in a process of recruiting you and it's not a, quote, secret yet, but I'm in the process of recruiting you? What if I'm getting political information from the White House or the Congress that isn't classified, but it's certainly the U.S. position in trade representations or things like that, but it doesn't have a classification on it? All that is covert action, acting covertly on behalf of a foreign government. China. So you get basically about, I would say probably close to 40% of China's effort is espionage or covert action, right? But the rest of it is split between, the majority of it is going to be stealing technology, literally illegal exports, or economic espionage.
So why do you think that 60% is focused on that? I mean, I feel like, again, comparison, we talked about this offline, to the Soviet Union, like, the very atypical Cold War espionage practice. Because
the Soviet Union never was an economic competitor to us. It was a political competitor. It was a military competitor primarily. It was never an economic, competition. And China, it is. And China, steals technology all the time, and then they turn it around, they flip it around, and then they mass produce, and they mass produce at a cheaper rate. So they're able to subvert foreign countries that way and control industries, which is what they're seeking to do. Be the dynamic rising power and controlling industries globally. And that rests on technology. And you're either going to get two things. You're either going to get intellectual property, trade secrets from economic espionage, or you're actually going to get technology that's not cleared for export, which falls into two basic categories. Dual use technology under Department of Commerce, export administrative regulations under Department of Commerce, or critical military technologies under ITAR. International Traffic in Arms Regulations under the State Department. And we see them steal from both. So they're stealing for commercial reasons. They're stealing the technology from military to save themselves 10 years worth of research and development. I mean, you take a look at China's robotics. Even though they're terrible, they only show you the good parts in videos. But take a look at their robotics development. They're exactly like Boston Dynamics. So Boston Dynamics comes out with something. They buy Boston Dynamics. They reverse engineer it. And you can see it. People have spoken about this, the pattern. Chinese have spoken about this, the pattern of China coming out with products 6 months or a year after the American products were pioneered. Well, who put in the decades of research to get from A to B? Who put in the money? We did. They just turn and steal it. So it's difficult to survive when you're in that position.
To what level are they doing that with military espionage? Are they having as much success in terms of converting?
Yeah, they really are. The J-20, a number of Chinese fighter craft are based on U.S. designs. It's just, and we've seen, that tens of thousands of documents on U.S. military technologies, have gone over to China. So it just, I see in cases all the time. One case of a guy, his name I'll remember, out of Seattle, when the FBI raided his home, and he had been providing to the Chinese government, he had been providing Boeing C-17 aircraft, McDonnell Douglas, all these companies have been providing. They've actually found a door under his porch, which led to a chamber, if you want to call it, a room under his house, which had over 300,000 documents in it.
Really?
Yeah, that he had passed. So it's, their collection apparatus for military technology is vast. That's why it makes up such a high percentage of the technology being shipped over.
So I know you highlighted this in the book as well. Like a majority of their espionage focused target area is Taiwan,
yes,
which makes a lot of sense. again, would you say because from the military perspective with the Soviets, I completely understood because you look at it and it's, at any day we could go to war with them, or you'll be fighting a proxy war, whatever it might be. But it seems like China is very avoidant of a war, which would be sensible because obviously it'd be cataclysmic for both sides, but the U.S. in most ways is the overpowering force. What is their goal in terms of targeting this information? Is it purely just to try to play catch up and gain strength, or are they looking for ways to kind of undermine if they do want to take Taiwan or if they do want to get to those?
Well, the answer
approaches?
is both. If you go back to the Warring States period, and it's interesting that all the senior CCP groups and senior military groups have Warring States sessions, right, where they review the tactics and strategies in the Warring States period, where you had 30-something, provinces, basically fiefs that break down into one at the very end. And they all conduct war. But you know what? Very few of those are battlefield, right? It's all coercion and manipulation and deception and espionage and threatening with militaries, making militaries seem a lot bigger and more powerful than they are. It's manipulation. In the case of China, it's not just us they're targeting, right? They're targeting all of Southeast Asia. We're going to roll the aircraft carrier by you, Singapore. And, you're going to get the message. Don't mess with China and don't side with the U.S. So it's a coercive way of manipulating the politics, in this case in particular in Southeast Asia, in all of Asia, to push people away from the United States so that, because there is a threat of the Chinese military there. And, as is the same thing with the bases there, right, that they put in the South China Sea. So there's a coercive element to them building this up. The other part is that Taiwan, although I think which actually could be starting now, but I think if you want to call it a takeover of Taiwan, would be far more likely to be a year of shutting down Taiwan utilities. Don't let them have electricity. See how they live with that. Economic warfare. Tell every company doing business in Taiwan, if you do business in Taiwan, you're not doing it here. Make your choice. Putting pressure on companies, putting pressure on shipping lanes, all those things that China would do before they would actually go to war. But in the meantime, they're a rising nation. Rising nation has a big military. Mm-hmm. That's just kind of a norm in our world. So, there are a lot of reasons for it. They want to be able to challenge to the U.S., particularly in Asia. They want to coerce Asian populations. That China is the emperor once again. Everyone bows down to the emperor. And they want to present a credible threat to Taiwan to push Taiwan in the direction of acquiescing.
Circling back, I know we did talk about the spy balloon. And when we were going through that, I know that you also mentioned the farms. So the idea of China's coming in and buying a lot of land. Can you maybe break that down as well? Because, we talk about these smaller espionage activities, but really China's laying foundations everywhere. Right.
Well, it is, and I don't know. A lot of people are very paranoid about the farms. I'm not in that category, and simply because could they collect from the farms, technical collection stuff? Yeah, absolutely. Would it be a fair risk? Probably so. There's very little explanation for having a technical collection gear inside a farm if that's what you're seeking to do, or air sniffers or something like that to pick up emissions off a local place. They say, well, they're picking them out in faraway places like where military bases are. Well, guess where military bases are? Sort of in faraway places, right? Mm-hmm. The land's cheap out there. That's why they put them there. So I don't know how much of a threat that is vice China's prospects of, hey, we've only got 15% arable land. We've got to import agriculture, period. That is the one thing that China is a slave to the world to, that they have to import agriculture to feed their population. Same thing with the South China Sea. They have to control the South China Sea to feed their population, which is actually the driving force behind them threatening everybody with warships and stuff, because they needed to feed their population, period. Mm-hmm. It's not an issue of, we were here 100 years ago. It's an issue of 70% of the world's seafood is consumed in Asia. The majority of that by the rising middle class in China. They need to take the seas, period. And the same thing, they need the land. In this case, I think they're buying a lot of the land so that they can ensure agriculture is, a pipeline of agriculture coming to China. In fact, the first Trump administration, Xi Jinping just said to Trump, in the future, America is just going to be another provider to China like everybody else, probably agriculture. So I think it's a business sense. They're getting in on it early and saying, hey, look, I want 10,000 acres to be able to ship to, produce produce and send to China and make money that way, because it's only going to get more, it's only going to expand as a business. Now, that said, we've seen them in marijuana farms, not so legally in marijuana farms, advancing business there. And certainly their locations, it's a question mark, but they do provide an opportunity. If you're that close to a military base, you can pick up satellite downloading signals, right? Because it comes out in a big cone, to the surrounding areas. So you can pick up that. You can pick up some long wave transmissions off bases. You can theoretically, if you're in a flight path, spying on planes that are landing. And we've actually seen them doing that in Europe. Spying on F-35 aircraft, that renting a hotel, buying a hotel just so that they could watch the runway and see aircraft characteristics. So there's certainly that concern as well.
I guess I'd almost be less concerned, and I feel like this with all this, but less concerned from the military perspective or military espionage opportunities, and more so economic. Again, like it seems like they're trying, as you were highlighting, Xi's looking for this land to be purchased to become a perfect pipeline back to China. I mean, is that something that we should be looking at even more so too, is the fact that the more and more they buy, they suddenly have a control within the country.
Yeah. I mean, everyone makes the argument they have 1/10 of what Canada controls in the country on land. And I got that. But again, Canada doesn't have nukes pointing at us. So are there concerns? Yes. And there are just concerns on so many, the investments of China, the controlling investments in Smithfield's ham and everything that they control, AMC movie theaters and all the rest that they've, come to control in the American economy. And the question is not so much of foreign control. We have that. We have that a lot with allies. Would anyone care if it was the British or the French or the Canadian, maybe the French, or the Canadians? No, probably not, because they're allies and they have been for a long period of time. But when we get constantly threatened by China, when we see all the theft of technology, the theft of trade secrets, the theft of secrets, and the threats from their warcraft and ships at sea, which they do to us all the time, the people have a right to be concerned about those types, because those, like dual-use technology, like so many things, those purchases can be used for legitimate, business things that helps China and also helps the economy in the United States. They could also be used for very destructive things like espionage or subversion.
So let's break down into artificial intelligence more. Just a couple of weeks ago, you're probably familiar with DeepSeek. That came out and, for one, tanked the economy for a day, but then also, killed things like ChatGPT, NVIDIA. Like, it really had a massive impact. With AI being this new technology that at this point, I don't even think we can comprehend the use cases for it. What is the war happening between the U.S. on it, and how focused in is China on AI itself?
China is very focused. In 2018, Xi Jinping led a working group. If you can imagine that, imagine one of our presidents leading a working group on AI. But the guy is, I think, an electrical or mechanical engineer. So, he made it very clear that China cannot be second to anyone in AI after that 10-month, I think it was, working group. And, they've also made it clear that the military applications for AI will be used, thoroughly used. They have no second thoughts that you do in the West about the potential for, problems in using AI for military purposes, cutting humans out of the loop. They're all for it. So there's a natural concern. And if you think about the espionage and the data collection that they do globally, and the data collection that they do through things like TikTok and every other platform that they have, all the apps that are sold through China, if you kind of consider the data collection that goes through them, the application of artificial intelligence is a tremendous multiplier, because the data is useless if you don't have a way to actualize it, to use it. And that's what AI gives them. So, and that's just one tiny sphere of espionage. And you have the whole military application, which is a better, bigger application. And you have the economic applications that can come into it, and the control of markets, and due to their investments, potentially the control of U.S. markets. All with all with an AI foundation, if you will. So, look, we don't know where AI is going. I mean, I don't think anyone really knows, what it's going to be. But we know that China has certainly aggressively moving on it. And you could see, I can define applications, and I don't know AI very well, but I can, see in the intelligence sphere and the military sphere, extraordinary applications to give one significant advantages in both areas. And I think that's the concern. China's not, the problem is China's not, a friendly nation. I mean, even in our relationship, even our economic relationship, it's not been a friendly relationship, a friendly nation. So it's actively and aggressively worked to subvert the country, subvert the political process, subvert, the economy. It's actively working on that. And now you can't deny it. I have a database of nearly 900 people, full of people who are working, in that effort. So it's right for the nation to be concerned that they have that threat facing them.
Do you think DeepSeek, it kind of really appeared out of nowhere. Do you think that there's a high possibility that it was able to quickly become that established via espionage?
Well, I think some of the aspects of DeepSeek using OpenAI data, against what they were supposed to do are well known. That's been documented. I think there's a lot of research going on to thinking how much more DeepSeek used. But it doesn't change anything. I mean, even the fact that they did, and again, we've seen tons of research done that takes us years at the cost of tens of millions of dollars, which China takes one way or another, uses, borrows, steals, however, whatever the terms are that they take it over, and then make as good a product or a second-rate product, but the fact is that they've cut out the hard part, right? So I think DeepSeek probably has roots in that, but again, I don't think it matters. It appears to be good. I mean, there's still, the jury's still out how good.
Yeah.
But it's out. It's cheap. I mean, so it's, for the rest of the world, if you don't think about it from the U.S. and think about the rest of the world, it's a game changer.
So let me ask this from a macro perspective, and then we'll get into more of the micro specifics. What do you think is a bigger threat to the U.S., economic espionage or military espionage from China?
Currently and in the future.
Yes.
I'm going to go with economic espionage. And the reason being is that look, when I train counterintelligence types and I say, truth is I'm not worried about you guys. You do what you always do. You'll circle the wagons. You'll throw a bunch of blankets on top. You'll sit on top of it with a shotgun and say, our secrets are safe. Hooray! The world's free for democracy. But that's not the case. Procter & Gamble isn't protected, right? General Electric isn't protected. Maytag, whatever these companies aren't protected. And that's the problem because they're vulnerable. And so if you look at the disparity between, the U.S. government, which is very used to doing business, its counterintelligence apparatus the way it does, and then you look at the industrial base, which every dollar they put into counterintelligence or insider threat or security is a wasted dollar, right? Most of those C-suite executives will tell you, don't put a nickel in over compliance. Only what we're actually required to comply to, nothing else, because they look at it as a waste of money. So they're pretty vulnerable. And I've seen cases of loss of energy technology that have gone to $400 million in loss in R&D. So, you only need a couple of hundred cases like that to literally bankrupt a nation.
So then if you had to pick a specific example or a specific focus area, and it could still be within the military, because obviously economic is kind of all-encompassing, while military, there could be something specific within there. What do you think is the most dangerous threat facing the U.S. via Chinese espionage?
Well, I would certainly think, gosh, I don't even know how to answer that. Reed, I don't. There are different spheres of economic espionage. There's the biotechnology is a huge deal. Information technology, another very, very huge deal. Big threats to the U.S. to change the economy based in those two particular areas. And China's moving to try and get control of biotechnology globally. Right? 90% of precursors for antibiotics come from China, right? So they want to be the control factor for that globally. That gives them tremendous pressure and power over the world. So that's kind of a primary concern, economic espionage in those spheres. And the military spheres, which it definitely exists, is Navy and force projection. And you can see that in all recent cases on what China's collected against. They're collecting against the Marines, their capabilities, their exercises. They're collecting against U.S. radar systems, Okinawa, and placed all over Asia. They're collecting against ships and capabilities, right? Specific capabilities and vulnerabilities of those vessels, right? I've also seen them collecting about what we know about their stuff. So that's collecting for warfare. That's what that's collecting for. They're looking for vulnerabilities in ships. They're looking for how to take down radar systems. They're looking to how to win a conflict. So they're two dynamic things there, and I can't tell you how either of these is going to play out. One of them, I'm sure, is easier to fix than the other, and the economic espionage requires a cultural shift, but not much more than that. Requires a Congress, requires a cultural shift, requires us changing the way we think about things. That's doable. The military, we could throw CI assets at it, but that portends to a far, far more destructive future if something like that happens.
Mm-hmm. I guess that is a good segue into, you highlighted this in the book as well, that if this was a war, I mean, it is, but if it was, we're looking at it or chess match, whatever, we're definitely currently losing. We're undermining in a lot of different areas in terms of, the way that we're interacting with counterintelligence, the way that we're kind of being able to quickly, pivot to the new ways that we're seeing. What can the FBI and CIA do over the next decade or so to be able to?
Oh, this isn't easy to do, ranks, at least easy to say. Well, first off, no one's in charge in counterintelligence in the U.S. I mean, you ask who's in charge, and it's no one. Everyone has their own pockets. Even in the Department of Defense, we have the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. Can't order the services to do anything. So the Army uses its own insider threat software. The Navy does its own, the Air Force does, and nobody's talking, right? No one has the authorities to actually do this. So authorities which could be addressed by Congress or the administration or both are a key part of this. Somebody's got to be in charge. Even if you just want to say someone's in charge of DOD, and someone's in charge of civilian, whatever, but someone's got to be in charge, number one. Number two, we've got to build a different relationship with industry, and that's CIA and FBI. I was called to a university once, asked to come and lecture, as they had a stand down, one day for all professors and staff on security and exports and, compliance and things like that. And they sent me the agenda, and I looked and said, well, you got the FBI and DHS here. Why do you want me? And they said, thought you could better communicate it to it. And when I went there, I understood why, as in every other FBI briefing I've attended. I could tell you more, but it's classified. I can tell you more, but it's classified. Business officials, senior business leaders, professors, wrong words. I mean, no, tell me, prove it, and then I'll believe you. I mean, they just don't, you can't have that approach and that attitude. So I get it. The FBI is trying to change. They've revitalized this group, InfraGuard, which has 60,000 members, providing training out to industry. But they're still not just structured on how to deal with this as a threat. And things have got to change. The compliance requirements from the government to industry have got to change. The reporting statistics, God, they're horrible. We don't even know. We have no idea what's going on in industry. None. And their ability to report is just crazy. There are no standards, right? So we have just craziness that goes on. We can't even get our hands around the problem. So a little organization and restructuring and considering how we're dealing with industry is going to be a big challenge for the government. So, last is congressional interest. I think it was a year and a half ago, we had a congressional hearing on counterintelligence. That was like the first time in 40 years. It was the first time in 40 years. And all of us, and people have been in the CI community, were, what? You've got to be kidding me. First time. So Congress needs to get more engaged. Congress needs to put forth legislation that helps us share with industry, helps us support industry, and holds industry accountable, right? Because industry's dorking up on this, just so that they can sell more to China. So it's not living up to its obligations.
Following with that, the Trump admin, you kind of highlighted that if things like BRICS and undermining the US dollar continue to move forward, we really got to make moves in this next 5 years before 2030.
Right.
Technology stealing, how that affects our economy, AI, like all these different industries, all these different ways that, China is kind of getting a quote unquote upper hand. What does the admin need to do in these next 4 years that can best equip the U.S. to move to the winning side?
Well, let's talk about a couple of different portfolios, for example, investment in China. We need to stop or radically alter the way investment is opened into China. We have Chinese, it's just 2024 that the Chinese entities on the New York Stock Exchange were required to start producing their internal auditing, which they hadn't produced before. They were getting waiver letters for over 200 of them, including China's, main missile manufacturers, and the ones who are making weaponry against us, satellite manufacturers and stuff, weren't required to provide their accounting. And even now, I don't know how well or how much or anything like that's done. Congress needs to really step in and say, you know what? If the accounting isn't done and met the standards in 6 months, they're off the exchange, and we need to coordinate with the Brits and do that. So that they're kicking them out of the London exchange. So in other words, starve them on particularly for military investment, the things that are going for emerging technologies into their military apparatus, which is what we are doing. Okay. That's number one. Just radically restructure the investments that are allowed into China, not to support their military or their repressive regime functions. Number two, I think Trump is going to do the right thing in encouraging businesses to come back to the U.S. If you can come back to the U.S., or if it's not labor efficient, and you have to move to Central America, let's go create a couple of 100,000 jobs in Central America, or 250,000 jobs in Central America. Tell you what, you won't need a border wall if you create hundreds of thousands of jobs there, because people say, I'm going back. Mm-hmm. And, you'll have secondary businesses that build up around those, and food and restaurants and, blah, blah, blah. So dealing with your friends and offering good terms for our businesses to move to friendly shores is another key thing I'd like to see relative to economics, to work on the economy. As far as, the hardcore stuff that we don't have, a strategy. I've talked to senior government officials, and you ask them, what's a relationship with China going to look like in 10 years? Where do you want to see it? A deer in the headlights. You would have thought I asked them for to explain to me the binary functions of quantum mechanics. They just, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do I mean? Where does this end? What's goal? What's victory? What's goal? What are the metrics to get there? How do you see this? What do you want out of this? Well, we don't, as a nation, we don't have that. Mm-hmm. We don't, we had it in the old days of the Soviet Union, right? State Department was in lockstep, as much as they can be, was in lockstep with the military and the intelligence community. They were all unified in how they were approaching things, and with the allies, everyone was basically on board in the same sheet of music. Completely flat on our backs with China. Whatever you decide to do, get a strategy. And all of government strategy, so we know, so we can approach it one way. Last, the states. The states have become particularly vulnerable to China, and China said in 2019 that, as the position towards us hardens in Washington, move towards the states. So they're actually taking covert influence activities on a state level, and some pretty overt activities as well, threatening states. I've seen that actually happen. If you pass this law, I think it was Wisconsin or Maryland, I don't remember which, but one of them, China threatened the state legislature, saying that because if they passed a law on lead in toys and lead on toy paints, that it would have disastrous results on your state's trade with China. The businesses from your trade with China. That's pretty aggressive coercion. They appeared at the National Governors Conference, and as they did this regularly, saying, you are not going to make money unless you take a voice against the legislation that's being pushed out of Washington. I mean, they're actively trying to coerce, a letter was sent out from the embassy to hundreds of businesses like this, major businesses and state governors saying, you're not going to make any money, your state's if you don't get on the ball and start squashing legislation in Washington. So we need to have a plan for the states is the short version of that, so that they don't fall under this type of coercion that China's strategy is always one of circle the center, right? So we pick different agencies, we pick academia, which can influence agencies. I've seen academics, their studies are paid for by China, and they'll go up and testifying on the Hill on China. Wait a minute. You got a grant from China. So, to do this. So that's got to stop. We've got to see that circling through academia, through businesses, right? Build, relationships with businesses and use those businesses to pressure Congress. I've been in the room when that happens. We've got to take measures against that. And then also the states. We've got to help the states to protect themselves better against the type of coercion or the type of propaganda and manipulation that China conducts. So we have a full plate, big strategy that has to go from the intelligence sectors all the way through the states to the economy. Got to be a national strategy and a plan.
I guess a final question with that is, can you win a Cold War when the enemy doesn't play by the rules?
Let's not call it a Cold War, because everyone always, says that to me. What's this Cold War? I said, well, you know what? It's our biggest trading partner. No, not our biggest, but one of our largest trading partners. It's nothing like what we've ever seen before. I mean, I more than say it's a Cold War, I'd say it's like Japan just prior to World War II. Right, because we're trading heavily with them. We're giving them in that case, giving them industry and giving them industrial products, and it's before we went to war with them. So it's a lot different. And I just do that to kind of jar thinking, oh, well, really is different from what it was in the old days of the Soviet Union. So I don't know what a Cold War is going to wind up to in this case. I think we're on untested ground, but I think China's got. I think our goal has to be making China comply to global, norms, global rules of behavior. That's what it's got to be, and we've got to push them and hold them into doing that. And we've got to have the, the strength when they sway from it, which they have repeatedly in their MFN agreements, in their joining, the World Trade Organization. Failure after failure after failure to comply. They just haven't complied with it at all. Then we've got to be able to pull the plug on these things. So pushing them into a position with our allies where they are behaving in accordance to global standards, global norms, is what we really want at the end. That should be, when I ask people, what's the 10-year vision? The 10-year vision is that they're actually working as part of the global community and working under global norms as opposed to trying to shatter them, which is where they are now.
If we do nothing and essentially kind of it's mission as usual, we're kind of handling the situation the same, what does the year 2035 look like?
Yeah. If I knew that, I'd be investing in stocks for my kids. Look, as we do nothing, if we were laymen sitting back and doing nothing, the prospect of conflict does increase, clearly. And I mean, look, even at this point, you have them deeply penetrated and vastly into thousands of infrastructure, points of critical infrastructure. So they're not doing that, we just figured we'd take a look and see what it looks like. No, they're doing that in the case of conflict to shut down the U.S., to shut down, food, to shut down electricity, to shut down water, et cetera. I mean, that's the only reason to do that sort of thing. So we've got to get serious. We've got to understand that. And we've got to build the type of things that that don't allow that. Because if they do win, if they're relentless in keeping pushing forward, which I don't know will be the case with Xi Jinping, who knows how long the guy's going to live and all those sorts of things. But if they continue on the current path, then they'll be a dominating force on the planet by 2035. They'll be pushing around Southeast Asia. They'll be pushing around smaller countries, pushing coercion. They'll destroy the world's oceans. I mean, they're already doing that now.
Mm-hmm.
We have 39 shipping vessels ocean going. They have 3,000 of them. I mean, it'll be a whole different planet, by that time.
Well, I'm going to be honest, Professor, this conversation scared the shit out of me because
I had that effect on people.
No, but it was an honor to have you on today. I mean, truly, like I said when we spoke on the phone, I think this issue is so ill covered, and the way that you can detail and lay it out, I mean, from both their own domestic capabilities and then also what they're doing within the U.S. is profound. And, hopefully the American people can wake up to it. Hopefully the political system can wake up to it because, as you just highlighted, we're running out of time, and if the world reaches that tipping point, we may not like where it goes.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a scary thing to think about, but momentum has been up until like the past year or so has been on their side. Post-COVID, they've stumbled a lot. So it's an opportunity for us. If we don't take advantage and set things sort of on a better course, along with our allies, if we don't reset this, then it's, they're relentless. They already said they have a 100-year plan, ends in 2049. Nothing cagey about it. They're completely out in the open on it. So we need to do better. I mean, I hope we're capable of it.
Well, Professor, thank you for coming on today. If you can shout out where people can either find you, find the book, or anything with Shinobi Enterprises, I'm sure people would love to jump on that. Links will be below as well. But
okay, yeah, I do run a small consulting company, which I work for governments and companies and such, and called Shinobi Enterprises. And so you can find me there. And I do actually I have a lot of my lectures and videos and papers that I've written in academia, all on this subject, posted there for free. So
awesome.
Anyone can just go there if you want to spin up on that subject, on this subject of Chinese espionage. It's a good place to go. I also provide, I'm the only one on the planet that I know of so far that provides online training in these areas. So courses that I have online, and a lot of companies, major industrial companies have attend them, which is I think they're just so every week I'm doing something and I'm exhausted from it. I got to be honest. So I just got to the point where I can't continue to do this. Let me find mechanisms to reach out and to do this, and that's why I put all this stuff online. So it's a wealth of area to read, to research, to watch videos if you want to get smart on the subject. And if you do something about it. Don't just be smart, right? Yeah. Talk to your congressman, be careful before you're buying Chinese next time. If you're in the type of fields for industry, be cautious about how you're dealing. If we're all a little more activist, I think the country's a fair bit safer.
Well, actually, let me ask one quick thing, because that did spark one question. Is if someone was worried about being recruited, if you had to pick like one main thing, how would they know they're being recruited?
Well, it's I think the nature of relationships there start to turn clandestine. I mean, most people know, they, especially the guys as of recent thing, they say they don't. Well, how was I supposed to know? Really? A person's giving you $4,000 for a paper and, and I mean, you barely finished high school. Doesn't that seem a little wrong to you? A little problematic? And by the way, you knew nothing about, global politics. So where are we getting this from? So, I mean, they're kind of key indicators that you go along with that. But you'll know when the approach starts to become clandestine. I get them all the time. Can we talk on WhatsApp? I don't even like you. Why do you want to talk on WhatsApp? I know it's, the movement away from a regular open relationship to trying to move clandestine. That's a key point. If they're asking you for stuff and they're paying you, if it seems too good to be true, it's too good to be true, period. So those are things that people need to be, realistic about, right? Don't get suckered in, be real about it.
Perfect, Professor. Well, thank you again for coming on. And, hopefully we'll have you back on soon, but hopefully it's not for something where China keeps, gaining upper hand or some other pop out. Hopefully it's going the other direction,
Well, that would be a nice one to have.
Well, thank you. And we'll see you then.
Thank you again.